Hello and welcome to the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1979 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Sally Field won for her performance in Norma Rae. But why did she beat fellow nominees Jill Clayburgh, Jane Fonda, Marsha Mason, and Bette Midler? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 52nd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1979. We'll be discussing how Sally Field won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today, I am so honored to have on the show. He's a screenwriter, producer, director. He co-created one of the best shows, in my opinion, of the modern era, Pose, for which he was nominated for multiple Emmy Awards as a director, writer, and producer. He's a triple threat. Welcome to the show, Steven Canals.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
I'm so thrilled that you're here, and also very thrilled that you're here to talk about one particular movie that happened to be the winner of this year, considering everything that's happening right now. So yeah, how have you been?
I'm doing well. We are, despite the fact, I'm doing well despite the fact that we're in the middle of a WGA, a writer's strike. SAG, AFTRA, the actors have recently joined. And that's been hard. It's difficult to be in a place where you aren't able to work. But one of the beautiful things that's come out of this entire period of time is just the connection with fellow storytellers. There's so many people who I hadn't seen in years, partly because I was working and then the pandemic hit, and we were all kind of in our own spaces. And so I've seen folks who I haven't seen in 3 years. So it's been really incredible to reconnect with people and to feel like, in this experience that we're all sharing, that we're going to come out of it on the other side and that we'll have each other, which is really nice.
Yeah. Well, here at And the Runner-Up Is, we're definitely allies of what you're all doing there. And I hope that the powers that be wake up and realize what's happening and that they are not the winners that they think they are. So yeah.
And we need to get back to work because,
yeah.
At a certain point, you're going to catch up to the current
yeah,
current Oscar race, and we need more films to talk about.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes. But yeah, before we talk about 1979, let's talk Best Actress as a category. So my first question for you, Steven, is what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
Okay, this is, well, two things. Let me just say, as I said earlier, thank you for having me. As a longtime listener of this podcast, I'm so excited to be chatting with you.
I'm so in awe that you even are listening. So
no, it's so surreal. For all the listeners who don't know, I'm wearing an And the Runner-Up Is t-shirt right now. Like I love the podcast, so I'm so excited to be here. And to answer your question, as a card-carrying Virgo, I'm deeply neurotic, and also I love a list. So it's very difficult to say like favorite. So I went back and forth quite a bit on this, and I kept telling myself in the moment, I was like, when I'm talking to Kevin, I'm going to know exactly who my number one is. And I still don't quite know. But so there's two performances that I waffle back and forth between. And so I'll tell you who they are. Then maybe at the end I'll say who the number one is. But those two performances. So the first one is Faye Dunaway in Network. That is a performance that I revisit. It's a film that I revisit often. My introduction to Network was as a cinema major at Binghamton University, and this was in the early aughts, it was like 2002. I don't even remember what class I was taking, but we screened Network, and I was blown away by this film. Like it felt, I mean, and you figure again, this was 2002, so this was over 20 years ago, but it felt so timely then, and obviously it's relevant now. Patty Chayefsky was just an incredible screenwriter and wrote what I think is just a really seminal piece and a really important piece of cinema. I should note that the 70s is my favorite decade of cinema. I think it's just some of the best work storytelling happened in the 70s. And I think a large part of that was just the political landscape. And for me, as a cinema lover, the best stories, the best movies are the ones that are not just highlighting particular experiences and excavating important narratives, but also I think are a direct response to what's happening, like politically, socio-politically, culturally in our country. And that's what was happening in the 70s. I would argue more than any other decade. So anyway, all that to say that Faye's performance in Network was something that I had really never seen before. And it's interesting when you think about it, especially the last couple of episodes, all of the episodes that you've highlighted, work in the 70s. When you look at these winners, when you go back to whether it's Jane Fonda and Clute, when you look at really all the performances in Cuckoo's Nest, like, I mean, it's really, really incredible. But women in particular were doing things on screen that they really hadn't been doing prior to the 1970s. And I love that so many of these performances, and specifically Faye Dunaway, who I think is in conversation with all those other films, is this woman who just is unabashed in her desire to be at the top. Like at the end of the day, it's funny because some people have framed her as a villain, and I don't necessarily see Diana Christensen that way. I think she is really, really great at her job.
Yeah.
She was hired to do a job, and she's really great at it. And I think that for me, I think one of the reasons the performance resonates so deeply for me and her character resonates is when I was in high school, this was just before my sophomore year, we did like superlatives, and I was voted by any means necessary most ambitious. Ooh. And I don't know that the by any means necessary is true, but I definitely have always been very ambitious. And I think there are certain performances and characters, Diana Christensen being one of them. I would also insert like Melanie Griffith in Working Girls, another one of those films and performances that deeply resonated with me and still does. But I love people who are ambitious and work really hard and are really great at what they do. And Faye just embodied all of that in a way that was delicious, And also she has one of my favorite lines in all of cinema, which is when she's talking to her team at the very beginning of the film, and she says to them, "The next time that I send a research report, you all better read it or I'm going to sack the fucking lot of you." And she says it in this precise way.
That. I know.
That just, it slices right through all of them. And I don't know, it's so good. Anyway, that's yeah. Great performance.
Yeah. Excellent pick. Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of fun talking about that on the 76 episode. I could have gone for like another hour talking about that performance. So
good. And then the other performance, which is very, very, very different. Again, it's another film that I go back to, and I'll tell you a quick anecdote about it in a moment, is Julia Roberts in Erin Brockovich.
Yes.
And I just really love Julia Roberts. I think that she's so charming, and she's one of the few people that, regardless of the quality of the film, I'm probably still going to see it at some point because she's in it, because I just enjoy watching her. But Erin Brockovich is one of those films that it was released, it was in 2000. So it was just as I was leaving for college, and I had, so my freshman year of college, I decided not to take a television with me because I was obsessed with film and TV, and I was like, it's going to take up too much time. I really want to focus. And 3 weeks in, by the time it was my birthday, which is in September, my parents were like, "You need a television." I was like, "I do." So they bought one of those combos, which was like the VCR attached to the TV, the little 13-inch. And
Hmm.
so one of the one of the VHS tapes that they purchased for me, along with this combo, was Aaron Brockovich, which I love. And I watched it, and this isn't a joke. Like, this isn't hyperbole. Like, this is the truth. I watched Aaron Brockovich every single week of my freshman year of college. So I've
Whoa.
seen that movie a lot.
You could probably say it like word for word.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I don't know what was my obsession with this film. That would happen to me though. Like, I would see a movie and then just be obsessive about it. Anyway, I think that the film, it's a really great film. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
It gives me all the feels by the time I get to the end. Marge Helgenberger, I think, is also great. Should
Hmm.
have been nominated for supporting actress, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Um, but Julia Roberts is just, she's doing all of the things that she's really great at. Like, she's charming, but she's also like really heartfelt and emotional. And then there's also this really lovely, like, romantic aspect to the character as well, in terms of her connection, not even just to Aaron Eckhart's character, but also to her children. Like, she's playing a fully realized woman, and her embodiment of that woman is one that I'm just really trying. Like Aaron is someone who I want to know. Like, that's
Yeah.
that's probably the best compliment I can give Juliet's performance, is like, oh, I want to know her. Like, I enjoy her. Like, she's great. She works really hard, not just for herself and her kids, but other people. And there's a sense of justice that character has that I also really respond to. So those are
Hmm.
my two. And again, I have a hard time picking number one. They're in a very close tie for me right now, but
I'll allow it.
thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, again, some people have said like five. So, I mean, two is good. But those two are actually kind of like weirdly in concert with each other, too, in terms of just like women who are just like in these. Like Aaron Brockovich isn't quite in an authority position necessarily, but really is like taking charge and fighting for what she believes in. And you could say that, the Faye Dunaway character doesn't maybe believe in anything when you think about it other than just like getting good ratings, but is just like really fighting for their beliefs, and just is like, sometimes the men in their lives don't know how to handle that. And yeah, I feel like those two are weirdly connected in a way.
Yeah, two women who are rallying against the man.
Yeah, what's wrong with that? And so is Sally Field here. So, but yeah, my other question for you: we love a winner, but we also love our robbed actresses. So, who would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
Another, like, Kevin, why are you doing this to me? Another, like, intense question.
Yeah, only have
um,
95 years to pick from. So,
yeah. um, I, I mean, and here's the thing: like, there are so many performances that I love. Like, I mentioned Melanie Griffith in Working Girl as like
yeah,
a performance that I
definitely.
revisit often, and I love that performance. I love Sigourney Weaver in Aliens. Um,
Mm,
I think Glenn Close in Dangerous Liaisons is perfection. Like, that's an
yes.
Oscar that I would absolutely swipe away and give to her. Um, I think my most heartbreaking loss, though, just because the movie, again, it's for me, it's the power of cinema is how it makes you feel. I
Mhm.
think that we can certainly have a conversation, talk objectively about isolating just what an actor or what a performer does, right? So, like, the first performance I think of is like Meryl Streep in really any performance.
Well, yeah.
um, but like, that's, she's an actor who everyone sort of is always highlighting. But I think specifically her performance in Sophie's Choice is one that people often cite as like, like, that's a really incredible performance that was put on film. But I think for me, it's like it's a combination of things. It's like, it's the performer, how they embody the character, how the movie or the character resonates for you. So all that to say that for me, my most heartbreaking loss is Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple.
Absolutely.
That's a film that I actually saw in the theater as a kid. My mom had
Hmm.
read the
Wow.
book, Alice Walker's book, and we went to Whitestone Cinema in the Bronx, which no longer exists, sadly. And I think I was 6 going on 7, but we sat with our popcorn and we watched The Color Purple. And and I've talked about this publicly before, like, I was so incredibly moved by the movie, and though I wasn't old enough to fully understand everything, there were so many competing things happening for me at the same time while watching the movie. It was seeing characters who look like members of my family. Like my family's Black and Puerto Rican, so to see a bunch of Black folks on screen was incredible. But also the connection. When Celia and Nettie reconnect at the end of the film, I just remember feeling, and I still do. Every time I see that movie, I cry at the end. I've never not cried watching The Color Purple, but I just remember at 6 watching that and thinking, whatever this feeling is that I'm having right now, this emotional response, like I want to be able to do something that professionally that helps people go to that same emotional space. And so it's
Wow.
really, full circle for me to now be in the career that I'm in. But the power of that moment, or every time I watch the film being moved and swept away by that narrative, has so much to do with Whoopi Goldberg and her embodiment of Celie, and every frame of that film where Whoopi's on screen, she's just mesmerizing. Like she really, really, really takes my breath away. Every time I watch that film, I'm like, God, I don't know where she went to muster that
I mean,
emotion and how she was able to sustain it for the duration of that film, because it's a really tough movie. Um, but she's brilliant in that role. She's brilliant. And she does so much with so little. She doesn't have a lot of dialogue in the film. It's really all in her. It's her body, her mannerisms. It's in her face. It's her eyes. For me, that's like a masterclass performance, and one that it breaks my heart that she didn't win the Oscar for that one.
yeah. I mean, all due respect to the great Geraldine Page, but I do think that is an example of how sometimes narrative can inject itself into, voting for Oscars when it should be a little bit more objective. And to think that that's a debut performance from Whoopi Goldberg on film, at least, is just like even more mind blowing. Yeah, that's one that I'm very much. I don't want to say too much, obviously, because I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm really looking forward to breaking down that one because I feel like that's going to be another very long and heartfelt discussion. So,
Hmm. I can't
yeah,
wait. I cannot wait to
yes,
listen. You have some heavy
yeah.
hitters coming in the 80s.
Yeah, a lot of my favorite queens are coming. Meryl Streep's coming, Glenn Close is coming, Jessica Lange is coming, and yeah, Whoopi. It's just there's a lot of fun ones. Okay, love that. Love all of those picks. So you're off to a good start. But let's talk about this year at the Oscars. The 52nd Academy Awards nominees were Jill Clayburgh in Starting Over, Sally Field in Norma Rae, Jane Fonda in The China Syndrome, Marsha Mason in Chapter 2, and Bette Midler in The Rose, with the winner being Sally Field. So before we break down these performances individually, any overall thoughts you had just to set the table here on this lineup?
Not, if I'm being honest, not my favorite lineup.
Okay, there we go. Yep.
I think that there are some performances here that are good. I don't
Hmm.
know that they're Oscar worthy, but here we are.
Yep.
There's for sure one performance in a film from '79 that I quite easily would swap out, because I just think it's another like really beautiful performance, an unexpected but beautiful performance that should have been nominated and is not in this lineup. But I think the thing that's really incredible about this list is that these 5 women they're great actresses. Like
Yeah.
these are 5 really solid performers who have all given us really, really great films and great performances. And so it's a little, like if you just saw their names together without the films, you think, oh wow, that's great. And then
Yeah.
you actually see the films and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Listen,
They've been better. Yeah. Yeah.
they've been better. There have been stronger lineups. So
Hmm.
so overall I would say great actresses, you know, all giving solid performances. I think that the one sort of observation that I will make, and we can dig into this a little deeper when we talk about the individual films and performances, but one of my greatest observations is that these are 5 films that are all directed by men and were all written or co-written by men, with the exception of the husband-wife duo who wrote Norma Rae. So I bring that up because I think that there is something that's happening here for a couple of these performances, which again we can talk about in relation to the material, what the actress gave, and then who was at the center of telling the story.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that has been an issue at times with just like a lot of the performances that date back to the 30s and 40s, really, where some of the tone is not always like basically you wish that a woman was involved at any point, like, behind the scenes. But I think in terms of this lineup, I think it's, again, yeah, it's good and good to close out the 70s. Not my favorite necessarily, but I do think there are at least two performances here that are among the best of this decade,
Mm.
if not all time. It is definitely an interesting commentary on the state of female roles at this time and how they're written. I think there are two films here that very much overlap quite a bit, as I'm sure you know what I'm talking about there.
Mhm.
But the other three, I think, are fascinating, meaty roles that are sort of going against the standard of, women being written at this time of like the girlfriend or the mother, where they're just allowed to be more multifaceted and allowed to be more complex. And yeah, we have our perennial nominees, as always, like Marsha Mason and Jane Fonda. We have Jill Clayburgh, I think, still in the glow of An Unmarried Woman from the year before. And then we have two really stellar, I think, Oscar debuts in Sally Field and Bette Midler.
Mm.
So yeah, a lot to dig into here, I think. Glad you're here with me to break this down. So shall we get to it?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, we're starting first with Miss Jill Clayburgh in Starting Over. So, Jill Clayburgh is coming off her first Oscar nomination, which we talked about last week for An Unmarried Woman, and here she gets this follow-up nomination the very next year, and unfortunately, as we mentioned last time, this was the end of the road for Jill's Oscar presence, but she's certainly riding high off the success of An Unmarried Woman. She makes another film called Luna from Bernardo Bertolucci, also in 1979, and then she has this role in Starting Over. And unfortunately, I also read that during this time she turned down Norma Rae. That's tough to hear,
Mhm.
because I think she would have been great. But Starting Over offers her this opportunity to really do what she does best, I think, which is blending comedy and drama and romance and telling the story of a modern woman. And this comes from Alan J. Pakula, who's coming off quite a bit of his own big critical favorites of the 70s, but doing something a little lighter than like Clute or All the President's Men. So, Starting Over is about a man named Phil, played by Burt Reynolds, who gets a divorce after his wife, Jessica, played by Candice Bergen, reveals that she's been cheating on him and she also wants to go off and be a singer, even though she's kind of tone deaf. And so he moves in with his brother and his wife, and they set him up with a nursery school teacher, Marilyn, played by Jill Clayburgh, who's a little eccentric, also has been unlucky in love, and we see how his unresolved issues over his divorce really become stumbling blocks in their relationship, and Phil has to decide who he wants to be with, essentially. So, yes, let's talk Jill Clayburgh. Any thoughts just on Jill Clayburgh as an actress and what you think of her here in her second and final Oscar nomination?
Jill Clayburgh was and will always be an incredible actress. I think she's so multi-talented, multifaceted in her approach to work. I think her An Unmarried Woman is really like that's the pinnacle of her career. But I also really, I mean, this is like a much smaller, not as well-known film, but I really, really love her as well. And there's a film from 1987 called Shy People,
Hmm.
with one of my favorite actresses of all time, Barbara Hershey,
Barbara Hershey.
which is actually how I was first introduced to Jill Clayburgh, was watching
Yeah.
Shy People, and then I was like, who is this incredible actress? And then went back to check out the rest of her work. But she's someone who is just disappears into a role. I think that's the thing that I really love about Jill Clayburgh, is that she's someone who, whenever she's on camera, I feel safe as an audience member. I know that she's going to take me on an incredible journey, and I just have to strap in for the ride, whatever it is,
Hmm.
whether I'm going to be laughing or crying. I never see her acting. That's the thing that I love the most about her.
Yeah.
So that's my feelings about her. I think my sense of Starting Over, let me start here, which is huge fan of Pakula. I think Clute,
Oh yeah.
All the President's Men, like amazing storyteller, incredible director. I feel that he is directing a drama, and
Okay.
James L.
Yeah.
Brooks wrote a comedy.
Mhm.
So I didn't
Yeah.
feel it just felt like they were approaching the story in very different ways. So and that's just like kind of an observation about the film overall. So
Yeah.
so the whole time I felt a little like I was like on a seesaw. I was like, what is
Mm.
happening here? Are we watching a comedy? Are we watching a drama? It didn't feel like a pure drama D, right? Which tonally
Right.
would have been totally on board for.
Hmm.
It just felt like there was I don't know enough about the film and the production, so I'm not sure if what the relationship between writer and director was, but I could feel the tension between the two.
Hmm.
And I think, again, looking at Pakula's filmography, it makes sense. Like this isn't necessarily in his general wheelhouse as a filmmaker.
Right.
So that's kind of my first feeling about the film overall. I think that
Hmm.
Jill Clayburgh is really solid in the role. With that said, the movie doesn't really give her a whole lot to do. And I think that that was the most disappointing. I'll be honest, I hadn't seen this film before, so this was one of the films that
Yeah.
has sort of passed me
Yeah.
by.
Me
So
neither.
this was my first watch. But
Hmm.
I think, as we were just discussing, and as you discussed last week, after her performance in An Unmarried Woman, I'm surprised that this was the follow up. You would assume that coming off of such an incredibly groundbreaking film slash performance, I don't know. I just assumed that like the scripts coming across her desk would be just as meaty. It's like what she's capable of. You've seen what she can do. This is what you're going to offer her. So I was
Hmm.
disappointed on her behalf. I think
Yeah.
to go back to the issues, and a lot of this has less to do with her. I think that, again, as we said, she's such an incredible actress that I felt like the tension for Jill was trying to insert more into this character that just didn't have a whole lot to do. The
Hmm.
movie has pacing issues. It's like they don't have sex until 40 minutes into the film. An hour into the film, he asks her to move in. So in those 20 minutes, they have a breakup and a reunion. And it's like,
Yeah.
what is happening? Like, what? I just, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think I have a lot of the same stray observations about starting over that I have about chapter two,
Oh
which is,
yes.
and I'm just going to say this really quickly, and that is, I think that a lot of the film, I'll stick with just starting over and say that the audience's buy-in to this relationship has less to do with the man who's really at the center of the narrative and more to do with what is this particular woman seeing in him, right? Like that's the thing that's going to help us
Hmm.
get there, because ultimately in starting over, we're seeing this man who's dealing with this breakup, and he's sort of not quite sure what to do with himself in the aftermath of his wife leaving him. And so he's not the most, in my opinion, not the most interesting or charismatic character. Like I'm not particularly invested in him from the beginning. And I think that, Burt Reynolds is a fine actor, but I didn't come into the movie. And again, like I'm maybe not the target audience, but, and perhaps in 1979, obviously he's coming off of like Smokey and the Bandit and all these other films. Like I'm sure, I get it. He was in like, what was it, Playgirl magazine. So,
Oh yeah.
he had a large contingent of people who really were attracted to him and enjoyed him. But for me, coming in as like a sort of casual viewer of his work, I did not come in with that feeling. So I really looked to Jill to get me over the hump of, oh yes, I'm invested in him and his character as well. And that we didn't get enough, there weren't enough scenes for me to understand exactly what it is that she sees in him. And I think Jill worked really hard to get us there. And she's a great performer. So I was invested in her, but the whole time I kept finding myself thinking, girl, like there's better people out there. Like just wanted someone better for her.
Oh yeah. I agree. I agree with a lot of what you said there. I think this is one of those movies that feels very set in a time and place. It's the 70s. There's jokes about how everyone's on Valium, and like the dynamic between men and women is more complicated now with the divorce rate going up, It's very really trying to reflect the times. And with that, I think it doesn't necessarily hold up as well as some others here because, as you said, the tone is all over the place. You don't know what exactly it's supposed to be. And I think even with Burt Reynolds, I think he's fine, but a little distant for me in this role, in this performance. I don't know if he feels super comfortable, to be honest, with this, like,
Mm,
just being the romantic lead type of character. But for me, it's the women, Joe Clayburgh and Candice Bergen, actually, who are great, and they really help to elevate some of this material that I think is really struggling to find direction. And there was actually that I read this review from Time Magazine about it that I very much agreed with, which said, "Right up to the moment that starting over is over, we are waiting for the fireworks to start."
mm,
So yeah, it feels like to me like cute situations, kind of funny at times, but doesn't really leave a strong impression ultimately. But none of it is the fault of Jill Clayburgh, who I find to be so just charming in all of her awkward energy and just like her ability to just portray a modern woman who stumbles over her words sometimes, who isn't exactly cool, but it's, she's doing her best. And it's another character where I can imagine like a lot of women, like with an unmarried woman, really maybe relating to this character in 1979. I think there's just something really refreshing and real about Jill Clayburgh, where even though she's now in a great place in her career, she still doesn't feel like a movie star playing a regular person, if you know what I'm saying.
hmm You know what's interesting about the other interesting observation I have about the film is that watching it, when I got to the end of the movie, the first thought I had is I could easily see Diane Keaton playing this role as well.
Oh,
And I
for
think
sure.
that to me, and to be clear, like that's not a judgment or a critique on Jill's performance. I think that it speaks to well, I think for me it's in the writing, right? Like I
Yeah.
like there's so much more that I think could have been done with that character, especially once again, I don't know the full, story of the production, but once they cast Jill Clayburgh, it's like I wish that they would have done more so that they could have continued to tease out all the things that she's really great at. Because I think watching the film, it felt like she was inserting those things in. Like the scene that comes to mind
Hmm.
is when Candice Bergen calls Burt Reynolds at Thanksgiving, and
Yeah.
she
Hmm.
cutting the turkey and she's listening. And I think that's a scene that I'm curious to know what it looks like on the page because watching the scene, my sense was, oh, she's bringing a lot to this. Like she's taking a scene that is pretty simple and elevating it in a really lovely way. And I think for me that was probably one of my favorite moments of hers, just because again it's so subtle, but the work she's doing is really nuanced and beautiful. But again, it's like I think if at the end of the film I'm telling myself I could see other people in that role, then it doesn't feel singular. And
Mm.
again, that's not her fault. I think it's what was on the page. So she did what she could with what she had. But I wish
Yeah.
that they'd given her more, and I think James L. Brooks is an incredible writer and director. But the thing that I wanted the most for both for Marilyn and for Jill portraying her is like I just wanted it to be clear what she wanted. Like I never had a strong sense
Yeah.
of what her desire was, so it really felt like she was just kind of the girl in the movie. And
Mm.
for me, she was infinitely more interesting than Burt Reynolds' character.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think your attention, it lights up every time she appears compared to him, who again feels a little sleepy, to be honest. But yeah, I think for her, like her introduction, I do think is funny, where like they're both walking up to the house and they don't realize that they're the people who have been set up on a blind date, and she's like, "Get away from me or I'll cut your balls off," or something like that. It's just like you immediately get the sense of kind of who she is right there, kind of like how on edge she is and neurotic she is, and I do think she specializes in that pretty well. I know this is kind of my own prior feelings on an unmarried woman maybe coming into play, but I do think she provides an understanding of her character on a more intelligent level than maybe again what the screenplay is giving her, even with what is a much less complex part here. For me, it doesn't feel like a two-dimensional, quirky, neurotic woman that you would see only in the movies. And I think it's because of her that she grounds it in some level of reality, because I very easily could have seen this in like a weaker actress's hands, just being kind of annoying and two-dimensional ultimately.
Completely. I
Yeah,
think this is one of those roles that in a lesser actress's hands, it's just a co-star in the film, you
right.
know.
Right. And like an extension of the man. Whereas I do think, like, when I look at her and I see her performance, again, not having anything to do with really the writing, I get a sense of like who she is when she goes home alone at night, if you know what I'm saying. So,
Yeah. It's clear that Jill worked really hard to give this character an interior life, which
right,
I
exactly.
appreciate.
She has a few like minor moments. Again, like I don't know if she has like a full showcase scene where you can be like, oh, that's the Oscar scene or whatever. But I like just in her little quirky moments, like when he just straight up says, I want to have sex with you. And she literally says, gulp, you know, and just like those very specific little moments that do feel like they come sort of naturally from Jill Clayburgh. And she just kind of like she wants it to be more personal, you know, because he's just like so brutish with it. And it's just like, I want to have sex with you. And she's like, well, I want you to say I want to have sex with you, Marilyn. So some of that stuff I do find charming, at least from her end of it. And I like when she after they do have sex and he like goes off and she says like, I am no one-nighter, I am going for my masters. It's just, which is just another really funny specific line. And it's like, of course, then she softens a little bit when she says that he actually left her a note and all that stuff. But I feel like, you know, those moments where she is sort of like expressing that internal critic that she has, like the voice in her head that's just like, why would you say that? Like that sort of thing, I think she really communicates really well for me. Like I feel like I understand. Like I've been there, you know.
She plays quirky very well, and
Yeah.
I found myself wishing that there was a sequel or a different version of the film where Marilyn is really good friends with Jessica. Like I wanted to see
Yeah.
Jill and Candace. I want that movie.
Same.
You
Yeah.
know, like give me like an odd couple where they move in together and they're talking shit about Bert and like
Yeah,
I
and
wanted that
she's
movie.
doing her off-key singing and she's annoyed by it. Like it writes itself.
Yeah.
I do want to just note as a side note, Candice Bergen and her singing of Better Than Eva is just camp excellence. Just so good. I don't know. I
Brilliant.
enjoyed her. I mean, there's not really a whole lot else, unfortunately, that I can really talk about other than what we've already said, which is that like she fulfills the role well enough. It's just that she doesn't really just get enough material to put this over the edge for me. And even some of the ending, I don't know if I fully buy some of that stuff where it's like she's set up with a basketball player and then of course Burt Reynolds tries to get her back and he's like fully committing himself to her and she sort of acquiesces after that. It's not really a satisfying ending for me. I do sort of wish that she got to like move on from this man who still has these weird hangups and he's not really a catch to me other than the fact that he's Burt Reynolds, I guess. But like like she does a decent job enough with the ending. It's just like I get to the point at the end where I'm like, well, I don't really know what this is leaving me with, you know?
Yeah, I think the ending is the one place where Jill's performance, I mean, she's a great actress and she's
Yeah.
solid throughout, but it's the one place where it loses me.
Yeah.
And I will say that when I was at UCLA working on my MFA in screenwriting, there was a professor, now retired, named Howard Suber, who taught a class on film structure. And one of the things he would talk about is those unwritten contracts between filmmaker and audience. And so
Mm.
we know going into a romantic comedy, the contract or the unwritten contract says that at the end of the film, there's going to be a reconnection if there's been a break between the main couple. And so I expected that would happen, but again, as we've been discussing, I never found myself really rooting for Phil and Marilyn.
No.
you know? And so as a result, it just her I mean, again, her performance is solid throughout, but I didn't feel I wasn't there, you know, like her performance wasn't enough to get me to that place where I was like, "Oh, I'm feeling really excited or happy for them."
Yeah. And again, I don't think that's her fault necessarily. I do think a lot of that just lies in the fundamental material that she's working with. But, I wish I got to talk more about her in future episodes. But again, this
Yeah.
was the end of the road. She still has plenty of good stuff in the 80s that I think is worth visiting. As you said, Shy People being one of them. Her presence is so, I don't know, very singular to me in a way that feels like this weird thing. Like I compared her to Christine Baranski on the previous episode,
Mhm.
where it's just like she's like kind of like upper middle class feeling, but also strangely like relatable at the same time. And it's just like this weird kind of combination that she exudes in her screen presence that is very unique for me.
I'm curious, just as a side note to this conversation about Jill. The first thing that came to mind as you were speaking is, in my mind, she should have had a much bigger career than she did.
Oh yeah.
The I think the postscript to that is, I think that there really are those actors who are true character actors, and it's not about becoming a movie star, it's just about the quality of the work and the content. And so
Mhm.
I agree with you. I'm disappointed that she didn't have more opportunities to be at the Oscars or to win, quite frankly. I think she really is a beautiful, beautiful performer, and I'll maintain that I think she should have had a bigger career, but I also I don't know, I'll have to go back and read more of her press. I don't know that that's something that she wanted. I'm not quite sure, you
No.
know?
Yeah, I read a lot of that. Even when she was doing An Unmarried Woman, when she was really becoming prominent, she really felt that, like, I can lead movies, but, like, I don't need to be Jane Fonda necessarily. Like, I
Right.
can just be, I'll take big parts, small parts, I'll do theater. Like, she just liked the craft for the craft, and she didn't really care too much about the fame part of it.
This
So
is this
that
is
might
very
be
this is very gendered language, but so I wanna acknowledge that, but she's a true, like, journeyman performer,
exactly.
you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I wish that like we could have had a late in life kind of like great supporting turn that maybe brought her back to the Oscars. Could have been Bridesmaids, but it wasn't. Maybe if she had a little more material there, could have happened. But anyway, anything else on Jill before we talk Jane?
Thank you for your work. We love you.
Yes. Okay. Jane Fonda in The China Syndrome. Really interesting one to talk about here. So, Jane Fonda is really on a roll at this stage in her career. She's now on her fifth Oscar nomination, third in a row. She's the defending champion after winning for Coming Home. And she is once again starring in a film that is of great social and political relevance here. So, The China Syndrome started out as pretty much an all male picture, with Richard Dreyfuss originally playing the role that Jane would play here as a TV reporter. But Jane gets involved, and obviously she's very politically active at this point in her career, so she really wants to do this. Not that she wasn't political at other points, obviously, but she was really blending her activism with her art that she was choosing to be in.
Mhm.
And The China Syndrome is all about a TV reporter, Kimberly Wells, played by Jane Fonda, who is doing a field piece at a nuclear power plant, and they happen to be there to capture a near nuclear meltdown. So when they get back to the studio, the TV station wants to bury it, and they're kind of fearing that they'll be sued by the power plant for shooting the footage without permission. So she and her cameraman, played by a young Michael Douglas here, go about their own rogue investigation, and they meet the shift supervisor, Jack Godell, played by Jack Lemmon, who realizes that the radioactive water is leaking and that the company's trying to cover it up and go about business as usual and is risking public health in the process. And I think it's also worth mentioning that the film is coming out at a time that really couldn't have been anticipated by them, where there was a real life accident that took place in 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania at a nuclear power plant. And only a few weeks after they released the film that happened, which really kind of increased interest in the film. But yeah, let's talk Jane Fonda and the China Syndrome. What do you think of the legendary Jane Fonda and her performance here?
I think that Jane Fonda is a superb actress. I mean, up to this point in her career, she gave us, a beautiful, beautiful performance in Clute. I also am a really huge fan of They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Like, I think that's such a
Hmm.
that's another one of those films like Network that so it holds up and it really has a lot to say.
And
So
it's prescient. Yes.
quite. And I
Yeah.
encourage your listeners to go back and either visit it for the first time or revisit it if they haven't watched it in a while.
Hmm.
So I love Jane Fonda. I think she's great. And I think one of the things I really like about Jane Fonda is that she always plays characters with intelligence. So,
Yeah.
and again, like I think Clute is a really good example of that. Like she's playing a sex worker there. Like it really doesn't matter who she's playing. Like she is clearly, as a woman, well read, and so she infuses that into the characters that she plays, and that I always appreciate about her. Like I can tell that her approach to her craft and to characters is like she's never looking down on the characters that she's
Right.
playing. So anyway, I say all that to say that here I think she does a really, really lovely job of playing both the ambition and the empathy of this character. I would argue like we don't really fully get the empathy until the very end of the movie, right? She has that
Yeah.
wonderful scene at the very end when she's talking to the media. But here again, it's interesting. We have another ambitious woman. We were talking about Faye Dunaway earlier, and again, it's like here's another ambitious woman from the '70s who's like,
Hmm.
going out there and I'm going to get this story, and I love that. I think my feeling about the China Syndrome as a film, which again, I think the movie then impacts the performance that Jane is giving. And it's similar, funny enough, to what we were just talking about with Starting Over, is that two things. I think one is that for a thriller, I never really felt like her character was in danger. So a lot
Yeah.
of that part of the narrative was given to Jack Lemmon, who, by the way, gives a phenomenal performance. Like, I think his performance is so great. Like, it really holds
Hmm.
up. I think there are moments in the film where I don't fully buy in to what's happening. So there are moments of convenience throughout the narrative. So I think like one of those points is when they're first at the plant and Michael Douglas turns the camera on to start filming what's happening. And I like my first thought was just looking at the camera. I'm like, that those cameras were so loud. I'm like, there's no way that he turned this on and is recording and nobody's hearing the of the film. Like I don't
Good
buy it.
point.
I don't buy
Hmm.
it. So, and you have the literal like plant manager in that small room with you. So like there's certain things that were
Hmm.
like just logic bumps for me in terms of the
Yeah.
story. But that aside, I think it's similar to what we see happening in Starting Over. It's really, it feels like it's up to the actors to sell us on the danger, to sell us on the things that are happening. And so I think Jane does the best job she can with the material. But again, I never felt like she was in danger. I was worried for Jack Lemmon's character, but I always felt like she was the savior. She was going to come in and she was always going to be okay. I never had any worry that she wasn't going to make it to the end, if you will. So for a thriller like that was disappointing. There were moments where I felt like the tension was deflated for me. Beyond that, I think that, and this is just an observation around, again, it's connected to the movie. I didn't feel that this was a particularly demanding role for her. And I don't know if it's fair to sort of, well, I suppose it is because all voters would have been looking at, all of their work. But having seen her in, her work in Coming Home was fine. I think, like obviously we talked about, like for me, like two of my favorite performances of hers are in Clue and They Shoot Horses, and just seeing what she's capable of here, it felt, I don't want to say that she was phoning it in, but it did feel to me like this was a role that she could do in her sleep. Like I just felt like it
Yeah.
didn't, like where's the challenge? Like there weren't any moments, and again, it really has to do with the script, but there weren't any moments for this character where I felt like, oh, there are all these complications happening in her life, or what's the interiority of this character and how is she feeling about the things she's doing. It's just, it felt very much like we were just watching a story. They would tell us in screenwriting, like, don't tell a and then this happens kind of a narrative. And that's very much what I felt was happening here. It was like, and then this
Yeah.
happens, and then this happens. And she was just kind of along the way, like she's checking all the boxes, she's doing what she needs to do. And I think in all of those scenes, like Jane is present. There's that wonderful scene in the bar when she's talking to Jack Lemmon, and that's a scene that I really loved, and it was great to see these two stellar performers in a scene together.
Yeah,
Um,
for different generations too.
yeah, which I totally loved, but I think again, if you really break down what's happening in that scene, like she just has to listen. Like she
Yeah,
really just
it's a
had to
lot of
pay attention to
reacting.
a lot of reacting. Um,
Yes.
and I was disappointed because I hadn't seen China Syndrome in a while. It'd been a minute since I'd watched it, so I was excited to rewatch it. And I wish that there was more for her to do. That's kind
Yeah.
of my main feeling about it.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like, I've really liked Jane Fonda just in the performances that she's been getting nominated for around this time, like Julia, like Coming Home, but also not really thinking that they're quite as strong as her work in They Shoot Horses, Don't They, or Clute, which are, two of my favorites of all time. This I do think is like somewhere in the middle for me, where I do think it is a return to form for me in terms of feeling like I do buy her as this person. There were moments in Coming Home and in Julia where I didn't quite buy it beyond just like Jane Fonda playing these characters. This
Mm,
does feel like she is in the pocket with this character, like with her convictions, and I think maybe she even drew on a lot of her own what she experienced as a like a young actress trying to get into the movie business and not really being taken seriously and like, being well liked but also kind of like getting those like pats on the head from male colleagues, if you know what I'm saying. Like
mhm.
I think she understands who this character is, maybe on a deeper level than a Coming Home or a Julia. What's interesting about the film though is that like, yeah, compared to all of the others that I've talked about from her, is that I don't really think this is set up as an acting showcase for her. Like the story and the message, I think, are really at the forefront here. And even Jack Lemmon, like you said, getting a much bigger showcase and is definitely the MVP of this film. But I do think, like, right away when we're introduced to her at the beginning and she's like prepping to go live for her big TV report, I'm like, okay, this seems like good casting already. And she has that powerful Jane Fonda sensibility and the confidence. And she's like kind of instructing everyone around her in the studio what to do. She's also glamorous and like very TV friendly. And just like as a character, you also see how she takes her work very seriously when it's then revealed that this has all just been for like a puff piece that she's doing. And I don't know, I think it's just like that commitment to the cause that I think she's really excelling in at this point in her career. And this is a pretty solid way of her sort of channeling that passion. I agree that it's not like a huge acting stretch necessarily, but I just think it's a good, solid, like she's providing what is needed for the film
For
generally.
sure. And I think
Yeah.
to your point, I the film is bookended by two scenes that I think are really great. And watching the film again, my sense was that's probably what got her the nomination is
Yeah.
that opening is I will say the opening's pretty brilliant. It's really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the end of the film is also like after Wilford Brimley talks to the press and is saying, like, no, Jack Lemmon's character was not crazy. And then she goes and she speaks, and like you could feel her heartbreak. And I think it's for me that last scene really is I think her best scene in the film. It's the moment where, at least for me, I felt like I could see the complications for Kimberly, right? Like
Yeah.
I really feel like in that scene I got a sense that she's now questioning the work that she does. And then the movie itself does this really fascinating thing where at the end of her tearful report, you then cut to this commercial. I think it was like a commercial for a microwave or something. And
Microwave.
it's
Yeah.
fascinating, right? Because it's like there's something so for me really heartbreaking in the truth of that moment, that
Hmm.
happens all the time to us now. Turn on the television
Yeah.
and you have these like really heady reports, smacked up against, advertisements for schlock.
Hmm.
And so, I felt in that scene like the what Jane gave us in this really beautiful and nuanced way, right? Because she's not like a booing and a hooing, but I felt the emotions of the character, and maybe I'm inserting more of like my read on it, but my sense of it is that in that moment, Kimberly realizes the complications of the work that she's doing, right? And that she's working within a
Yeah.
system where she was trying so hard to report on what was happening at this plant and to help save lives. And the question of like, was it all for nothing? Because the likelihood that this will continue to be perpetuated is pretty great.
Yeah, definitely. Also, just as an aside, this very much feels like coming after Network. To go back to Network, like this feels very inspired by Network in that sense, especially that ending. But yeah, I think just in even in her line delivery, she kind of is very accurate for me to the kind of rhythms of like TV reporter speak, like putting emphasis on certain words, having that kind of like almost melodic tone almost, and being professional but like still kind of upbeat and enthusiastic. This is obviously before what happens at the end,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like, that's harder than it looks. Like I don't know if I could fully get into like the rhythm of that because it is so specific. But yeah, I find that like even though it's still Jane Fonda and is one of the most recognizable people in the world at this point in 1979, she feels more well realized and in the pocket for me than in Julia or Coming Home, which do feel like those star vehicles that don't fully convince me that she is that person. And I think when we do get those small moments of personal life, like when she goes home and she has like her pet turtle, which is very specific, and just like, eating lettuce, like leftover lettuce for the turtle, all of that stuff just feels like very specific. And also, I was reading from Jane Fonda's book, is a lot of her idea is her kind of in trying to inject a little bit of that like personal life into this story that is not really all that invested in her mostly personal life.
Yeah.
So I think that's a smart, intuitive thing for her to at least try to give her some kind of specific, like distinct personality traits, I guess.
For sure. And I think, to go back to what we were saying earlier around when we were discussing Jill's performance and like could you see other people in the role? I think that this is one where I wish that Jane had more to do, and I wish that Kimberly was, even with those really specific like nuances and moments, I can't really imagine another actor in the role. I think
No,
that there's just a very, again, the word that keeps coming to mind is intelligence, but there's just a very specific way that Jane Fonda presents herself and the way that she inhabits characters that works for me in this particular role in this film. And I
exactly.
think that other people may have played her as overly ambitious because there are those moments, like I
Play
think,
Dunaway,
yeah.
you know?
And I don't know if it would have worked, but I think here it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you're also seeing also in the nuances of her very carefully navigating, the office politics of working at a newsroom and dealing with the higher ups and towing the line as far as like fighting for the story, but also not going too hard with it or too emotional because she knows that she's a woman in a man's world here. And
Mhm.
you could have like Michael Douglas, his character, making these like loud proclamations and making a big scene and be super emotional, and like no one's going to say much about that. But of course, if she did that, she would be thought of in a certain way. I think she's dealing with these kind of delicate dynamics in a way that I think the film kind of is brushing up against, but not fully diving into, just the whole dynamic of her largely being surrounded by men and having to deal with these systems that are set in place, that like these barriers that shouldn't be there, and how she's just not taken seriously and how she's treated differently because of she's a woman.
Those were some of my favorite scenes in the films, is when she's in the news office and when she's in the newsroom and
Yeah.
she's in those meetings with her coworkers. And you just touched on this. One of my desires for the film would have been for them to unpack just a bit more the politics of Kimberly being a woman working in this male dominated field. And this is one of the films that, coming out of it, I was like, gosh, China Syndrome it would be really fascinating to see a remake of this film and to have,
Mm-hmm.
like a Greta Gerwig or um
Christopher Nolan.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
I don't know.
Sorry, just Barbenheimer's on the mind. Yeah,
And then have lots of men just talking. But yes,
yeah, that's true.
but I'm fascinated. I would think like this film written and directed by a woman would be really interesting to me because I just think that there's so much about the experience of being a woman in news that clearly the dudes were great, but like they just didn't have the range. So it's not there.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of, as you pointed out, we sort of glide over it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we see a bit of it, but
Yeah.
we don't dig all the way in, and that's something that I personally really wanted more of from the film.
Yeah. And also to just go back to what you were saying, which was the sort of initial interview that she has with Jack Lemmon's character, I think that unfolds in a really clever way where it's like she's not too overt with what she wants, but it's clear that she's looking for answers. And it's like that push and pull, I think. It's like a dance almost, where they both kind of have agendas, I guess you could say, and they don't want to let on too much. But there's like this unspoken acknowledgement between them that like they both know what they're doing and they both know that they're not revealing the full truth of their intentions here, maybe. But I think that's something that is truthful, you know, just in terms of like being a journalist and like trying to maneuver your way through, you know, interviewing people in delicate situations and not wanting to go too far, but also wanting to push because you don't want to think that I didn't push hard enough when maybe they were willing to open up. So again, I think that is not fully dwelled upon, but I guess ironically for me, those moments of like the journalism aspect were more interesting to me than even just like the nuclear meltdown. So
Completely. I agree.
yeah.
Cosign.
Yeah, maybe it's just because she's personally more involved in that. Whereas I think, like, generally the story starts to sort of overshadow giving her a lot of bigger, like, character moments. Again, it's not really a good acting showcase for her. It's just a lot of her presence is to just be steady and professional, but there's not a whole lot else for her to work within beyond that. I mean, she does have some good stuff, I guess, in like that climactic scene where Jack Lemmon's character is essentially creating like this almost like hostage situation at the power plant, and he's making her interview him there. And she does have some good like subtle facial reacting gesture moments as she's like trying to keep him calm and not going too off the handle. And you feel like that she wants to keep herself and everyone else around them safe, obviously. So she's like trying to keep him calm, but also knows that this is probably going to be the biggest story of my life. And like, I don't want to blow it. I want to get it right. For me, she does communicate a lot of that, even when the script is not actually making her say any of those words, you know?
Yeah. I think something that came to mind as you were speaking is that I think what's always going to pull, I shouldn't say this 100% of the time, but for me as an audience member, what's always going to pull me in to any film or any specific performance is going to be the emotion behind it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in this film, she's not getting the emotional story. Jack Lemmon is, but I
Yeah.
think as we pointed out, I think for us the more interesting story actually lived with her. Like I was more interested in what was happening with Jane, and like when she wasn't on screen, I kind of was missing her being
Yeah.
there. And I just wanted that was that only that's the layer that was missing. Was like I just needed
Mm-hmm.
her narrative to be more emotional, like to pull me in that way. Whereas I think, Jack Lemmon has a very emotional story, but the thrilling aspect of his narrative is also bogged down a bit by the science of what's also happening. And so
Yeah.
at times it was like hard for me, even though I thought his performance was great. And so that's the thing that always kept me invested. And I was always emotionally present with him, even if I didn't fully understand exactly what it was he was reacting to.
Right. Right. Yeah. All of the nuclear mumbo jumbo, I kind of like in one ear and out the other for me because like I knew that I only have to focus on Jane Fonda really for this discussion. So like, I don't need to understand the complexities of this nuclear meltdown, but I still think like by the end she does communicate the sort of horror of the situation that unfolds from there really well, and especially in that final news report, as you said, and her still trying to be professional even though she knows the truth of what happened and how they're all trying to cover it up now. you wonder where she goes from here. Like, does she just quit, honestly? Because this is like a defining moment in this woman's career, I think. And does she try to like still work within the system somehow and try her best to still be, still have integrity within this? I don't know. It leaves you in a hopeless feeling by the end. So
Yeah, I have to say the other thing that, and I think this is a credit to Jane Fonda's performance, is that at the end of the film, when just before Jack Lemmon's character is shot, they've like taken over that control room. That
mhm.
scene, and again, this is more of like this is clearly a writing note, but that sequence is long, it felt, I
Yeah.
just watching it, I just kept thinking like they could have abbreviated this. And I think like the pacing would have helped to ratchet up the emotion we're talking about, the tension in the scene. Like I just thought it was like, why are we stretching this out so long? And I think
Mhm.
to a credit to both Jack and to Jane, but I think a credit to Jane, particularly after Jack is shot, is that we were there with her. So like we never I wasn't lost, right? Like I was present with what was happening
Yeah.
and I was there because I was invested in her, So I think in lesser hands, in a weaker performer's hands, we would have been done.
Mhm.
I think that's the moment where people probably are like, okay, I've seen enough. Let's, it's the end of the movie, but fine, what else is on television?
Yeah.
But you stay, you're there because she's compelling, you know, and I wanted
Yeah.
to see what happens next for her.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would agree with that even if I didn't have to specifically watch it for this. I think, just like outside of the context of looking at this as a best actress performance, I think, yeah, there's something in her eyes for me, Jane Fonda, that is just like there's always something so expressive and direct, I think. Like you do just understand exactly what she's feeling, and it's not elusive at all for me. So,
Yeah.
yeah, another good one from Jane Fonda, almost at the end of her run, but this was a good bridge, I think, between the sort of political Vietnam stuff and then what's to come with like her personal drama with her father on Golden Pond.
Hmm.
So a new phase of Jane Fonda is soon approaching. So stay tuned for the 80s for that.
And hopefully you talk about supporting actresses when you're done with lead
Oh,
actresses.
jeez. Yes, another 95 plus year journey. We'll see. We'll see. Not committing to anything yet. All right. Let's move on to Miss Marsha Mason in Chapter 2. Marsha Mason now getting her third Oscar nomination in 7 years. Pretty good hot streak going on here. And once again, she is starring in a film written by her husband, Neil Simon, riding high off the success of The Goodbye Girl. But this one is especially interesting because Neil Simon was quite autobiographical here in writing Chapter 2. It was very inspired by his relationship with Marsha, where they got married relatively soon after they met, and Neil Simon was also a widower at the time, which is exactly what the setup is here. So, also, Marsha is reuniting with her Cinderella Liberty co star here, James Caan, who plays George, who is an author who recently lost his wife. And tell me if you heard this before on this very episode. He gets set up by his brother on a blind date with a woman. And that woman is Jenny, played by Marsha Mason. She's an actress and a recent divorcee. So both of them are carrying some baggage in regard to their previous relationships. But of course, they very quickly fall in love, which is a surprise to his brother and to her friend Faye, who actually are having a secret affair themselves. But the film is essentially about George and Jenny and their struggle to allow George to move on from his dead wife. And we don't get too much of a balance, I don't think, about her personal struggles until very late in the movie. But anyway, chapter 2. Yeah, thoughts on Miss Marsha Mason and her somewhat true to life performance here?
Well, there's a lot of overlap between chapter 2 and starting over.
There sure is.
um,
Yes.
I
This is
think
going to be
that
like a rerun, I think, of what we
yeah,
just said.
I think so. Uh,
Hmm.
I think what chapter 2 has going for it, again, if I'm comparing it to starting over, is that here we have a very handsome Jimmy Caan
Mm-hmm.
in the lead role, and he actually feels like he's cast in the right movie. Like I buy him in the role. I don't know that I fully am invested in the relationship between these two either, but at least I feel like he's, we're working with two people who are they're in the same zip code, in terms of the film.
Sure.
I think there's a lot around that I have to say about chapter two. One is that
Mm-hmm.
I feel that the film, and again, this is less about Marsha's performance, more about the movie, but this feels like a drama that's masquerading as a comedy. So
Mm. Yeah.
there are funny lines in the film, but I don't think that there are no funny set pieces, like
No.
there's that scene in the horse stable where they're articulating, it's like the fear of marriage scene, or
Mm-hmm.
there's that scene that where they argue after the honeymoon, which I think is probably her best moment in the movie, but it's also heavy and heady. And I think it's interesting, as I'm saying this out loud to you, I'm also having a realization, which is I don't know how you make a movie about loss, about a widower, and have that be fun. I mean, I'm sure some really great
Yeah.
storyteller can find a way. I don't know that Neil Simon is that person. Um, I also have to acknowledge that in your I think it was 77 episode where you had Chelsea on, you were talking about the Goodbye Girl.
Yes.
I
Yes.
couldn't get out of my head what she was saying about Neil hating Marsha. So I don't know if I would go that far.
Yeah.
But uh I will say, I think the thing that the film did for me in thinking about Marsha specifically is I really appreciate her willingness to say, I'm in this relationship with this man, and so sure, I'm going to star in a movie where I'm playing a version of myself. I think that Marsha Mason as an actor I think she's charming. She's charming. That's kind of the word that
Yeah.
always comes to mind when I think about her. I don't think that this is a character that's complicated. And the truth is, I think, and this is, I'm not sure if this is a criticism of her performance or the writing, maybe a combination of both, but I liked her character more before she and James Caan get together. So
Mm.
for me, I had a really hard time in the film resolving who she is when she's single versus once she meets him and they are in a relationship. So I think about, like, there's that scene before they start dating when they're on the phone and she tells him she has a headache.
Yeah.
I love that. I thought that scene was really funny, actually. I enjoyed her in the scene. Or, there's that moment where she's confronting Valerie when she asks for the key, right? And so I'm thinking about, like, who the character presents herself to be in those scenes versus once she's dating him. Like, there's that moment when they're in the library and she gives him the books, and I'm like, and it's so, like, she's got this, like, wide-eyed look, and I'm like, wait, what happens? Like is and maybe that's the story that Neil wanted to tell, but I just
Yeah.
thought she came across as, so the character is so confident, and Marsha played her that way, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
she seems very self-assured at the start of the film, and then they start dating, and somehow, like, all of those qualities that he set up about her just go away. And so
Mm-hmm.
once they leave, I don't know. I was just, I never fully got on board. And this was another one of those similar to Starting Over, where I was like, I want better for you. Like, I
Yeah.
like James Caan's character more than I like Burt Reynolds' character, but at the end of the day, it's like, this is a man who's still very much in love with his wife who's passed away and is clearly not dealt with his grief. And I don't understand what it is that you see in him and why, unless you feel like he's broken and you want to help put him back together, which that's not really part of the narrative. I'm like, why are you here? Like, there are so many other people, and you're beautiful and you're smart and you're funny. There are other men. You don't need
Yeah.
this one. So
Mm-hmm.
I that was a problem for me. I also felt that their courtship was way too abbreviated. So I never
Yeah. I was gonna say the same thing. Very fast.
very fast. So I just again, I'm repeating myself, but I didn't see what she saw in him, other
Yeah.
than James Caan is really handsome. But what was the connection? What's the real
Yeah.
emotional connection? Just didn't happen for me.
Yeah, I also really struggled with this film. I mean, I get that it's very personal to Neil Simon and to Marsha Mason, but it's the kind of thing to me where it's obviously very interesting to the people involved, but also like it's none of my business. Like I don't think it really extends to the audience necessarily as like a satisfying film at the end of the day. I think for me personally, like with starting over, I do think James Caan, who I normally really do like, this is also not one of my favorite performances from him. I think he's fine. I think it's just like I don't know if he's fully the best at like dramedy necessarily, but yeah, I mean like he's even said after the fact that like he just did this for the money.
Hmm.
And that the movie was a total nothing. Like he fully said that in the press.
Well,
So yeah, I think a little bit of that lack of interest with the text maybe is showing itself a bit in the performance. Not that it's bad, like I said, but I don't know if it's the right fit for him necessarily for me. But with Marsha, like, yeah, she's solid. It's a lot like The Goodbye Girl and even a little bit like Cinderella Liberty, where she's just playing a character who's been through bad relationships and she's become a little jaded by them, and she's still hopeful but also is making like those sarcastic quips. Like it's very much in her wheelhouse. It's just that the material itself is very standard sort of romance drama setup. Both of them have the baggage when it comes to love, and she's obviously playing it with like the same kind of frankness that she usually does. For me, it's just I feel like there aren't a lot of defining characteristics, sort of like what you were saying a little bit in terms of like those characteristics that she does have tend to go away the more the movie goes on. And unlike Jill Clayburgh, who I think feels for me fully formed, like right out of the gate and quirky and specific, for me, Marsha here just doesn't do much in terms of specificity. Like she does a fine job with it, but she doesn't do quite enough for me to elevate this, unlike with The Goodbye Girl, which also centers her character a lot more than this does. Like if this were more balanced like that movie is, I think I would have kind of responded to her performance more. But I think, kind of like what you were saying in terms of like the balance of the movie, it's just like it doesn't do enough to show us why she wants to be with him at all. And it just seems all defined by what he thinks she's interested in him as, because it's written by Neil Simon. It's not co-written by them, you know?
completely. I have to say, I think I might get flogged for saying this by your audience, but Marsha Mason is, I think she's a good actress. I think she's a good performer, but she's someone who, and perhaps it's just the roles that she was attracted to or the films that she was starring in. I've never really felt like she's someone who disappears in a role. And I
Yeah.
think that really came through for me in this film, where for me, I felt like there were scenes where I could see her acting.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it just felt like, she hit set that day, she had the lines and they were being recited. Like I just didn't feel, and I think again, it's not fair to compare, but in the way that you were talking about Jill in starting over, like I think that because there's a lot left out on the page when it comes to this character, there was a lot of room for Marsha to come in and fill in the gaps, and I didn't feel like that ever really happened here, and
Yeah.
that was disappointing for me. I think there's one moment in her performance. It's that big dramatic outburst where she gives the monologue,
The Oscar scene.
the big
Yeah.
Oscar. Yeah, literally,
I mean,
I wrote that down. The
it was like
Oscar
written
scene.
for her too. This is your Oscar moment, Marsha. Here you go.
Completely, and it's the I feel good about myself, I'm nuts about me. And and the
Mhm.
other thing, and this is the funny thing, it was like you can tell that they were absolutely pushing this as the Oscar moment because the way that it's shot, like the framing of it, it's like you got James Caan's back towards us the entire time, the camera doesn't
Mhm.
move, and we're just on her and she's just going to
Yeah,
town.
one take. Yep.
Yeah, and it's good. Like I was invested and I was like, "Oh, there we are. Great. You're giving me something. Here we go." But that in context with the rest of the film, it just wasn't enough for me. It just I needed that same passion. I wanted more verve throughout the film, and I didn't get that from her. But I think, as I said, as I noted earlier, I don't know that we get that often from her, like, again, like, I think Goodbye Girl she's good in, and I think,
Mm.
Cinderella Liberties is another one, like, those are good performances from her, but I don't know that I'm walking away from either one of those films or those performances thinking, like, memorable, like, I'm gonna keep
Mhm.
talking about that weeks, months, years down the line.
Yeah, I would generally agree with that. And I think she kind of found herself more in those supporting roles later on, which, I mean, it sounds really bad to say, but I do think sometimes those are a little bit better fit for her. Like when she's just randomly showing up in like Grace and Frankie, for example, as like a friend of Jane and Lily. Like there's something a little bit more fitting for me in that kind of role, where I think she has an interesting presence, especially for the 70s here, but I don't know if she is as captivating as Jill Clayburgh or Jane Fonda. So, I mean, I think she also does her best to sell some of the lines that are a little bit clunky, I think, just like when you really look at them. There is one that I wrote down because I was just kind of like thrown off by it, where they go back to his place and he says something about how like we could begin in the bedroom or we could end there, and she says endings are just beginnings backwards. And I'm like, that sounds like one of those things that's supposed to be like profound or like funny or quippy, but also doesn't really mean anything. Like I don't know. There's a lot of those lines in here that they sound like they're supposed to be funny, but also you're not really laughing at them. And so I don't know if that's a failure on the screenplay part or on her part or somewhere in between, but yeah, it's just it feels very surface level as a performance for a lot of it until we get that late moment where
Yeah.
they finally wake up and are like, "Oh, we should probably give Marsha Mason something to do here." And it happens, and I feel like if the film had invested me more in understanding what it is to love a very difficult man, I think those moments where she finally is losing the facade of just being like a generally good time gal kind of thing, then I would feel like, oh, you really earned that scene at the end. But
Hmm.
then for me, when I'm watching it, I feel like this just feels like awkwardly inserted to give Marcia something to do, and I don't fully believe it. It's tough for me.
Yeah.
Like it works outside the context of like when you're watching the film, like, oh wow, what a great monologue. But I don't know. I don't know if the film earns that.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So kind of a bummer. Like I am rooting for her. Like I find myself like when I'm watching The Goodbye Girl or even watching Cinderella Liberty or this film, like I really want to lean in and understand her motivations, and like I'm investing in this character, but I sometimes struggle to fully get over the hump, I guess, in terms of being like, you're a solid B for me, and you're not quite at A, but like you're doing a solid job with it. So it's hard to get super excited about it at the end of the day.
I had a thought actually while watching the film, which is, and so chapter two is the other film of the five that I'd never seen before. So I was curious. And one of the thoughts I had is I think, not every performer is meant to work in every genre. And I had this thought where coming out of that, big monologue, that dramatic outburst, the Oscar scene, that I thought she was really good in, but I agree with you, was not earned. My thought was, I wonder what her career would have looked like if she had been in more dramas. Because I thought she did a really great
Yeah.
job, and it's just a quick little pop, in the
Hmm.
film. But like I was totally on board, and I bought her in the scene. Again, like in the context of the rest of the movie, it didn't quite work for me, but her performance in the scene, because that's what we were isolating and paying attention to, I was like, oh wow, she's really giving it here. And I thought,
Yeah.
I'm surprised that she didn't do more dramas. I'm guessing based on her relationship to Neil, and her work leading up to this moment, that's probably just not how Hollywood saw her, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know
That's
that
it.
at that time, it's not like today. I think we're seeing a lot more actresses have more agency around their career and the choices that they make. And then you have folks like Reese Witherspoon, who has started a whole, production empire.
Yeah.
And so, I had the feeling that she was just sort of working within a system that said, this is who you are, like you give us rom-coms, you play the girl in the movie.
Hmm.
But I'm curious, if we had put Marsha Mason in, like, how would she have done in a film like China Syndrome? That's
Yeah, I
curious.
would have loved to see that. Yeah, I know. Sort of related to that, I just wanted to note the presence of Valerie Harper here as her friend Faye, who's having an affair with Leo. First of all, just like when it randomly shifts over to that, like within the context of the movie, I'm like, okay, I guess we're gonna do this now. And like we have this scene where she's like talking about her frustrations to Leo about like the whole sudden relationship with Jenny and with George, which felt like a little out of place and kind of slowing down the momentum of the film. But also, like, when I'm watching that scene, I'm like, I kind of wish maybe Valerie Harper was maybe in the Marsha Mason role. I think that would have been really interesting and a little bit more of a compelling screen presence. I think that could have been a different dynamic. I don't know. I'm sure it was always going to be Marsha because she's playing herself essentially, but I don't know. Whenever Valerie Harper showed up, I'm like, oh, this is like a nice little burst of life in a way.
Completely agree. I loved her scenes. Thought she was
Yeah.
great. They actually had a really nice chemistry together.
Hmm.
Again, another one where it would have been really fascinating to see the spin-off just between these two gals, and their life
Yep.
in the city. Um, like, I want that film. But
Hmm.
yes, Valerie Harper is someone who, like, obviously I'm familiar with her television work, but
Yeah.
realized while watching this film, like, I don't think I've ever seen her in a feature. And
I
she
know.
was
Me too. Yeah.
great. I thought she was so good, and I was actually, again, I think it just, what's the kind of career that you want to have? But I was surprised that she didn't catapult out of this film into being like a leading lady in romantic comedies, because I thought she was really
Yeah.
great. I was pleasantly surprised by her and her performance.
Yeah. There's a little bit of like a Goldie Hawn kind of presence to her that I think it could have been something that they could have used in film. But anyway, nice to see her at least. I don't have a lot else on Marsha, unfortunately. I think maybe we can move on unless you had anything else.
I'm so good.
Okay. Let's move on to our final losing nominee, which is Bette Midler in The Rose. So excited to talk about this one. We've got a true icon to talk about here, and also following a very similar path to this Oscar nomination as other sort of music divas that I've talked about before, like Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, even Liza Minnelli to a certain extent, where she found success in the theater and she was a successful recording artist. So for Bette, she got her start on film in an uncredited role in Hawaii, after which she moved to New York City, where she studied at the HB studio and makes a big splash on the stage, including in Fiddler on the Roof. And she made her first album, The Divine Miss M, in 1972, and she won a Grammy for Best New Artist. She made more albums. She did an Emmy-winning special. Plus, she won a special award at the Tonys. So, like, by 1979, she was already 3/4 of a way to an EGOT, which is wild. I know
Incredible.
people don't always count, like, the special honorary awards as part of that, but still. Like, being able to sort of excel in all those different areas, though, just at such a young age, I think is remarkable.
Hmm.
But she did a few other movies, mostly small parts, and then The Rose is her big starring debut in film. I don't know if I fully count it as like a film debut necessarily, but certainly her biggest role of this kind of prominence, sort of like a Andrew Day kind of scenario a few years ago. But The Rose started out as a biopic of Janis Joplin, the great blues singer, but the family didn't grant them the rights, so they heavily revised it to be very loosely based on Janis. So it tells the story of a rock singer, Mary Rose Foster, played by Bette Midler, who is a famous rock musician, and she has a great raspy voice, but she's also addicted to drugs and alcohol to the point of abuse, and she's also dealing with an abusive manager. So she goes off to be with this guy, Houston, who she randomly meets one day and takes a liking to her. And that relationship is also kind of rocky. So it's very much about the struggles that she encounters due to her rock star lifestyle and her eventual downfall. So I think we've been sort of building up to this. This is a big one. Thoughts on the divine Miss M, Bette Midler, and her very committed performance here in The Rose?
Okay, I just have to acknowledge that the next two women that we were going to be speaking about, Miss Midler and Miss Field, they are two of my mom's favorite performers of all time. Sally Field being her number one. So just gonna share that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the two of them are like great mom favorites, the both of them.
Very much
Like, they're
so.
a lot of mom's favorite actresses. Yeah.
So I share that because I am very familiar with Bette Midler and her work. And I think, I like most people who, are just a fan. I grew up with Down and Out in Beverly Hills and Ruthless People and Big Business. And like, I loved her voiceover work in Oliver and Company. And don't even get me started on Beaches because, it's Bette and Barbara Hershey. Like, come on.
I mean, right?
Hello. I
Yeah.
think my mom's favorite movie of Bette's is Stella,
Mm.
which she watched while she was pregnant with my sister. So I think that that film in particular has a
Wow.
special place for her. But anyway, I say all that to say that Bette Midler is a supernova. And this
Mm-hmm.
is the kind of performance that Oscars are made for. It is a full-bodied performance. It's everything, right? It's an emotional
Mm-hmm.
performance. It's also a vocal performance. It's a physical performance, and I love that Mark Rydell made like very, very intentional choices as a director to highlight all of that. I think it would have been really easy because she's so striking, like she's just really beautiful, that you could have kept the film in mostly like mediums or close-ups. But I took note of the fact that a lot of the film he kind of hangs back, which is an interesting choice,
Mm.
right? Because when you're far
Yeah.
away, then you're not really close to the performer, then you're not necessarily always seeing all the emotions that are happening on their face. But because she's such a physical performer, you get to really see her body, you get to see her move. So anyway, I took note of that, and I thought that that was something that was obviously sets her apart from the previous three performances that have been
Yeah.
nominated, right? Is that she's not giving you just the face, but she's from head to the very tip top bottom of her feet. She's giving you everything, and every single scene she's pouring all of it. I just kept thinking this must have been so exhausting for her, you
Oh my
know.
God. Can't
Um,
even imagine.
but she is incredible. I think she's just this really beautiful. She's I actually thought a lot about Amy Winehouse, who's someone that I
Mm.
adored when she was. I think her Back to Black album is incredible. We also share a birthday, so I feel oddly
Oh.
connected to her. But um, here you have Bette playing this woman who is in many ways just wounded. She's just broken and can't ever seem to move forward because she's always attracting other broken people to her. There's that moment with, is it Rudge, where he basically says like, what was I supposed to do? They're like having an argument, and her response, the line is like, if I knew, the fuck would I need you for? And I think like
Mm.
that's, to me, like that one line is really synthesizes everything you need to know about this character, which is that she's lost. She's just a lost soul looking for a lifeline and looking for safety. And the movie's so heartbreaking because you're just watching her move through life not being able to find that. Like she just needed one person to protect her. Whitney Houston was another performer who I thought of while watching this film, was another person who is like, from the beginning, it's just you didn't have any, or even Britney Spears, quite frankly, who thankfully
Yeah.
is alive, but just didn't have anybody around them protecting them. And I think here Bette Midler does such a fucking phenomenal job of portraying that anxiety, feels like the wrong word, but the anxiety around knowing that there are no safe harbors around you. Like, I think for me, the film,
Yeah.
it makes me want to cry. The film makes me, the whole time, it was like, God, she's just like she's like a boat adrift in the middle of the ocean, and there's no
Mm-hmm.
land around her, and there's no one there to sort of be the lighthouse to say, come this way. And so you're just watching her fall apart the whole film, but she does such an incredible job of emotionally pulling you in from the very beginning, from the moment that she steps off of that plane, you're with her,
Mm-hmm.
and that bottle falls, you're just like, oh my God. And because Bette is such a warm presence, and she's so great, I mean, obviously that's from years and years of being on stage. She pulls you in and you're completely invested. So from the very beginning, you want to protect her, right? Like this character is so messy, and in many ways, it would be easy to kind of dismiss her and be like, "Oh, I didn't like her." But I think the film works because Bette is playing her. Like it was really, really, really great casting, because having
Mm-hmm.
her there, there's no moment. At least there was no moment for me where I turned against the character. There was no moment throughout her journey where I thought, I don't care what's happening to her. It's and it's all of that lies in Bette Midler's performance, that I was totally emotionally invested and on board the entire time, and I just wanted to see her be well and see her get taken care of and find safety. It's a film that I hadn't seen in a number of years, and I didn't expect to be so emotionally moved by it again, like going into it
Yeah,
and knowing what
me
to
too.
expect. But I was like, I just
Mm-hmm.
killed me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that scene when she goes home and it's like, it's still not enough. Like she just literally does not know what it is that she's chasing. And it all lives in, again, it's this multi-layered performance of, it's in her body and it's in her eyes, but it's also all in her voice. How you can pick any three scenes in this film and play them, and she sounds different in all three scenes. She did a wonderful job conveying, just through, if you just turn the visual off and just listen to the audio, you know exactly emotionally where this character is based on the way that was how she sounds. And so
Yeah.
to me, this was like another one of those like really beautiful like masterclass performances.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's in like the literally the very first scene, which is in the present, is one of the way that the film is framed, where you only can hear her singing the Sweetheart song, Let Me Call You Sweetheart, and you hear just the brokenness and the pain, and it already sets up how this is going to be such a devastating story. And I completely agree that this is an astonishing performance, and it's one of those performances for me where I do feel exhausted by the end of it. And sometimes that's not exhausted in a good way, but here I just walk away just being so in awe of her talent. And for this to be her first fully substantial role in a film, and to go to the depths and to the vulnerabilities that she goes to here, it's just incredible to watch. And sure, you could say that like her work as an entertainer up to that point really helped her here to convincingly play a rock star who can command a room. But like, this is also very different from the kind of traditional pop music that she was doing at that time. Like, and it's a lot grungier and dirtier, and to keep using that word, raspier,
Mm-hmm.
and just so full of pain that it does still feel like a transformation in a way. And I think she's able to make you believe that she could have been one of those great fallen rock stars at this time, or whenever this is supposed to be set in like the 60s. She just fully gives herself over to playing this role, just like warts and all. And like she even mentioned herself, like seeing herself for the first time from like watching it start to finish, and she felt like kind of turned off by just how open and exposed that she is here. And she would later come to respect it, obviously, but at first she said she was really taken aback by just how she is like so naked and raw. And I understand what she means. Like, it's such a big performance, but it also never feels false. It never feels over the top, or like she's trying too hard to be the kind of manic personality that Rose has. She just has a larger than life personality, and she burns bright and she burns fast.
Mm-hmm. Completely. I have to say, I was fortunate to see Bette on stage when she was in Hello Dolly a few years back.
Oh my
And
god.
like, I mean, this was what, over 40 years ago. And even now, she's still giving us that same energy. But this performance, it's interesting too, because she has the benefit of it's her debut, really. Um,
Hmm.
and so we don't come into it with any preconceived ideas of who she should be, despite the fact that obviously she already had an album and was a known performer. But as an actor, it's like you just get to, this is who I'm presenting, who I want to be. And it's like, what a debut. I have to say the thing that is really surprising to me is that she didn't continue to get these kind of heavy hitting dramatic roles. Like she sort of goes into being
Yeah.
really just a comedic actress, and she's brilliant at that. But anyway, I found myself like after rewatching the film, going back and looking at her filmography, and just being so curious about the fact that either she wasn't pushing or that there weren't directors who decided that they wanted to utilize her skills, because it's so clear here that she's like capable of anything.
Yeah, that's something I thought of too, is that, I mean, she obviously has like a big sort of bold personality, Bette Midler, but yeah, she really is like, she could again go to such depths with a character if she really invests in it. And yeah, it makes me wish that there was maybe another, like a late in life turn from her that she could turn in, because I'm sure she's still got it.
Yeah. Can I say there's two scenes in the film that for me really deeply, deeply resonate? I think obviously most
Yeah.
people who watch the film will talk about the last scene when she's at the football field and she's on the phone.
Hmm.
And that's heartbreaking. But I think there's two scenes for me that really, I think, exemplify just how strong the performance is. And I think one of them is when she's on stage singing When a Man Loves a Woman,
Oh my God.
and
Yes.
it's heartbreaking, and she's clearly like been anesthetizing herself and her emotions, and like the song becomes it's a plea. It's like that's the thing, is like to me that was one of the strongest scenes in the film. And I thought she's she's pleading for so much, right? Like she's not just it has so much more to do with like what the song is about. It's like it's not just about a man loving a woman, but it's like it's her plea for sleep, it's her plea for
Mm.
salvation. It's not wanting to be a commodity anymore. It's just really, really powerful. And her, again, it's not just the song and the way that she sings the song, but it's the look on her face as she's singing the song that I was like, this is brilliant. And then the
Yeah,
other scene for me is
totally.
when she's talking to Dyer, and she asks if she's sexy, and she's clearly just looking for love and validation. Like later on, she asked the question, like, do I look old? So it's, but there's that scene where they're in bed and she's talking about having sex with the football team.
Mm,
And it's clear that she's just testing him. Like my read of it is that she's trying to push him away just to see if he'll stay. So it's like a really
100%.
beautiful, the scene is really beautifully written, but the way that she performs the moment is also like, you can see it's such a subtle shift in her face, but you can see the like, I'm asking the question and I just want to see if you're there with me or not. And again, it's like, you don't get that every day. You don't see those kinds of scenes, and you don't see performers like convey that kind of emotion in such a subtle way often. So it
Mhm.
really is it's a stunning performance.
Yeah. And to go back to your metaphor that you used before, like the Houston character, Frederick Forrest, is like, you think that he may be like the port in the storm for her, that she could finally find someone who's going to take care of her and is not going to judge her and is going to have her best interest in heart. And yet, certain things happen along the way that causes it to be rocky on his end and on her end. Like, neither one of them are fully at fault, they both have their flaws. But I find myself, even if I know, just like I've seen the film before and I know where all of this is going, I know that this is not going to fully last, you do find yourself rooting for this relationship at the end of the day, because he really seems to see her beyond the everything that comes
Completely.
with being the Rose.
Yeah.
So I think their chemistry is also really sweet.
Off the charts. And I know we're talking about the ladies, but I have to say, Frederick Forrest, who sadly actually passed away just a few weeks ago, he passed away literally the day before I rewatched the film. I was like, oh, that's really sad. But his performance also stunning, like so great. And
Yeah.
and I think all of the chemistry that and the connection that we didn't get in chapter 2 and starting over, all of that we get in The Rose.
100%. Yeah, and I'm glad that the Oscars also cited him for supporting actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really good performance.
Mhm.
And I really like also when she does get the chance to be vulnerable in a different way, which is like in her scene, like with her music idol, played by Harry Dean Stanton, the Billy Ray. And he's pretty tough on her, and he just seems to embarrass her and says to not sing any of his songs again. And you just see this deep, just like almost a humiliation on her face. And you see how even through all of the sort of bluster that she has at times, that she is incredibly vulnerable and almost childlike at times, and like receding into herself. Bette actually talks about how Harry Dean Stanton was quite cold to her in real life, and so like
Mm.
some of that vulnerability is kind of like her own real feelings of like not knowing what to do in that scene, and just like really being on edge. And the same thing goes for when she has the woman who comes out of the woodwork, who she had an affair with, um
Mm.
however long ago that was, and she told Mark Rydell that like, I don't really know how to play this, like I've never had a relationship with a woman like this. And I think you can also see there how even if she is like deeply uncomfortable and not entirely sure what to do with herself, how to conduct myself, because this is like a different kind of relationship that I've had in the past, it still kind of works for the character at the same time. So like for as much discomfort as Bette may have had with those kinds of scenes, they do weirdly lend themselves in a nice way to what the film needs.
Completely. Very method.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah, I guess so. She did not have some nice words to say about Harry Dean Stanton.
Hmm. Hmm.
But anyway, digging up old wounds there. In a very recent interview, she talked about that, how she never forgot that. But anyway,
I'll have to look that up.
um, yeah, but I do love just when we go back to her hometown and she is expressing her frustration at the gas station, I think it is, with the older guy who knew her from way back when and who doesn't recognize her at first. And she pulls a little bit of like the diva behavior. And even though it's more of a comedic scene, maybe, there's also a real sense of her being very just like disappointed that she thought that she would get this warm reception of her being back in town, and like she was really looking forward to this, even through all of the horrible shit that she'd been through up to that point. Like, at least I can go back to my hometown and nothing will have changed, and I can just be this superstar, like that person going back to the reunion and being like, look at all these things that I did, but then feeling like, oh, like this guy doesn't even know why I'm in town.
Yeah.
And that frustration, I think, is also really well played, and that entire ending section is just like off the charts for her. Like, it's hard to even talk about.
Yeah. It's breathtaking, not just for
Yeah.
the beauty of what she's doing, but the emotion of the story.
Yeah, and to talk about the big phone booth scene, it's so bracing and raw. It's the scene that I always think about with this film, just the absolute brokenness that she feels as she's calling her manager and doesn't even know where the stadium is. And she's just fully lost in every sense of the word. And she's resorting to drugs again and is just like feeling this emptiness and this numbness. And she's just so desperate. And then, of course, she calls mom. And it's just, she feels like that little kid again, almost, who's like just kind of eager to please her parents almost, but is also saying like, oh, you don't have to go to the concert if you don't want to. It's really, really tough to watch. It's hard to watch without choking up.
Yeah. No, it's heartbreaking. And the visual lends itself. So
Yeah.
it's not just her performance, but it's the fact that she's at a football stadium, that there are these, high school kids in the back playing, especially connecting it to the conversation that she's had earlier in the film
Yeah.
about sleeping with the football team. It's all of it is just, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and somehow she just full circled her entire life. And yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. And of course, so is the very last scene where she does get to the stage, and just watching her being escorted to the stage by her manager is, and she's just so out of it, and you know that this is the end, like gone. She's so far gone at this point. And her still being able to pour out this incredible vocal on Stay With Me is another song that I find myself deeply moved by, just like When a Man Loves a Woman.
Mm-hmm.
You just feel all of the pain and the past memories flooding back into her, and immediately having that followed by her monologue and then Let Me Call You Sweetheart it's really, really a tough watch. And we can certainly talk a little bit about whether the difficulty of it may have been too much for Oscar voters, maybe, when we get to the Oscar segment. But I do think it's just one of those scenes that, for me, that this ending, and then obviously coming in with the Rose, her singing the Rose over the soundtrack, it's an emotional wallop of an ending. And
Completely.
yeah.
Yeah, it's all so powerful and really moving. My only critique of the end of the film is I actually think we could have just ended on her performance. We didn't need the seeing her collapse. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that it puts a very specific button on the character, but I think from the moment, really for me, it's like that scene in the telephone booth through the performance. It's like there's no one watching the film thinking that at some point she's going to find salvation, at some point she's going to be okay. And so to me, it like the collapse feels a little heavy-handed. I just don't think the
Mm-hmm.
movie needs it, is what I'm saying. I think for a film
Yeah.
that has so many really beautiful subtler moments, it's just such a slap when it's like we didn't really need it, because we've sort of been seeing her, we've been getting slapped the whole film. So it's like we didn't really need it at all. We know that the end is inevitable and it's not going to be good. So that was my only observation, just in terms of the film overall. But but her performance obviously is just magnetic and pretty perfect.
Yeah. I imagine a modern take on the material may have gone with the ending that you suggested there, and gotten a more poetic message by the end. So anyway, Bette Midler, incredible. The Rose. Seek it out if you haven't already. It is in the Criterion Collection.
Is
So there you go. Anything else before we get to our big winner?
Thank you, Miss Midler, for your art.
Yes, truly. All right, let's get to our winner, Miss Sally Field in Norma Rae. So we've now arrived at Sally Field, who is someone that has had an incredible career, and I truly think that despite having 2 Oscars, she still feels kind of underappreciated by the Oscars, because she only has those 2 lead wins, and she has another nomination decades later for Lincoln in supporting, but only 3 nominations total, which she should probably have like double that. She's just someone for me that I think should probably in like that Jane Fonda or Ellen Burstyn range of having like at least 6 nominations, considering all the great work that she's done. But to introduce her, this is a relatively new narrative to talk about here, where Sally Field started off in television and was a bona fide TV star. And I don't think there's anyone of the past winners that I've talked about who quite compares to her level of fame as just like a TV star. She was the star of Gidget. She was the star of The Flying Nun. She won an Emmy for her work in Sybil in 1976. And then she breaks out in film with starring roles in things like Stay Hungry and Smokey and the Bandit. And she sort of struggled with being taken seriously because of The Flying Nun, especially. And then Norma Rae was her big dramatic breakthrough in terms of really cementing her as one of the best actresses of her generation. So let's talk Norma Rae. It's about a woman named Norma Rae, played by Sally Field, who works at a cotton mill in North Carolina, and she's not pleased with the working conditions. And she has kids by different men, and she's trying to take care of her parents who also work at the mill. And then she meets a union organizer, Reuben, who opens up possibilities for her. to become an active voice in getting her coworkers to unionize. And the film is all about her difficulties in doing so and the toll that it takes for her along the way. So let's talk the woman of the hour, Miss Sally Field, and this very timely film as of this recording. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so this is really interesting. Norma Rae, I think of the 5 films, I would argue it is the most successful. It was nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, it was.
And so this is a film that obviously the Academy enjoyed more than the others, than the other films that
Mhm.
than Sally's competitors. And going into it, this is another one similar to The Rose that I hadn't watched in a while. I was really excited to see it again, especially because, as you noted, like we're in the middle of a strike in Hollywood. You know, we have both writers and actors striking for, a number of reasons. And obviously the unionizing has been so important and essential for workers' rights. So excited to see it for that reason. And I think the movie does a really great job of portraying that journey. I would say overall, though, the movie doesn't completely work for me for a number of reasons, and I can certainly talk about that. I think overall, my sense of Sally in the film is that she was great. Like I think that she is another one, similar to what you were saying, just one of our best performers. She is someone who, as I noted earlier, like I grew up with her. Like my mom's I would, it's really hard to say what her favorite movie is, but I know one that's certainly on like her top 5 list is Sybil. So my mother, like I grew up with that film because she loved it so much. But my mother also loves like Not Without My Daughter. No, not, is it Not Without My
Sure.
Daughter? What's Sally's?
Yeah.
Was that it? And then also like Steel Magnolias. So she has a lot of films that, again, as we noted, she's like someone that moms love. So I've grown up
Mhm.
with her work. And then as someone who works in television, for me, if I was listing like I think performances that are the best that I've ever seen in television, Sally Field is on my top 5 list for her arc in ER,
Mm.
playing Maura Tierney's mom. Like she's brilliant. She's just really, really great. So anyway, she's someone that I've just come to always expect to be great.
Yeah.
And I think similar to what we were saying about, we were talking earlier about, I think we were talking about Jane maybe, but she's someone who like I always feel, actually we were talking about Jill Clayburgh when I said she's someone who when she's on screen I feel safe. And I think Sally's
Yeah.
another one of those people that I feel like I'm in safe hands. When she's on screen, I'm like, I know we're okay. We're good. We're going to go on a great journey. And so for me, her performance lies in subtlety. It's not a
Mhm.
very, I love Norma Rae because she's so, I love a complicated character. And I love that she's just
Mhm.
like a super complicated woman. She's like, yep, I've got, 2 kids from 2 different baby daddies. Like I'm working this job in this mill. And, like she's just a little messy, lovable, and I think lovable because of Sally. That's what
Yeah.
pulls us in. But also, it's not like a super bombastic role. And it's interesting because I feel like if Norma Rae was made today, it would just be super loud and noisy. And it's not that, right? Like
Yeah.
the film isn't that. Like, I mean, not that Sally doesn't have lines because she does, but I don't think that she has a moment that is like a clear Oscar scene, if you will, right? Like I think
Mhm.
the scene that I would argue is her Oscar scene, she actually doesn't have any lines at all. And it's when she walks in, writes union on the
Yeah.
cardboard and then gets up on the table and shows it to everyone,
Mhm.
right? Like that to me is, again, to me this is another one of those like masterclass performances where I think other actors can watch it and learn a lot, because I think what Sally does in the film is that without a lot of words, she's able to convey the interiority of the character. So there's that
Yeah.
scene, like the scene that really comes through for me that is again small and subtle, kind of a, I don't want to say a nothing of a scene, but it's not a big scene, is when her dad comes to talk to her outside of the mill, and he's outside of the factory. So he sits down and they're having this like really beautiful like father-daughter moment, and he puts his hand on her shoulder and you see that he's missing a finger. And
Oh
and
yeah.
and that's just like that's a physical subtlety to this, right? Like they never acknowledge it, they never talked about it, but like that moment where she's listening to him and you can see that she's like there's this wide-eyedness, like this is my dad and I really respect him and what he has to say. And then that final moment where he puts the hand and walks away after he's talked to her, and you can see her sitting and processing what he said. It's like it's so precise and fine, and that's kind of what I think about with her performance. And I think I appreciated it so much more because to me the script isn't very subtle. Like there weren't a lot of nuances on the page, right? Like that, whether
Mhm.
it's like that opening scene when with the doctor when the mom can't hear. I just think that there's a lot of scenes in the film where everyone's just very plainly stating what's happening, like a lot of on the
Yes.
nose dialogue. Like people are just here it is.
Hmm.
It made me think of that like adage that they tell us in school when you're working on screenwriting. It's like show don't tell, and there's
Oh yeah.
so much exposition throughout the movie. And funny enough, she doesn't get a ton of it. Like I went back and I scrubbed through some of those lines, and it's like it's a lot of it doesn't live with Norma. It's like the people around her. But I
Hmm.
appreciated that even in the moments when she is kind of just plainly stating something, again, in a lesser actor, it would have just sounded like written dialogue, but with her, it still feels natural and real. So again, I think Sally's a great performer, and I really loved her performance here. Like she's playing a hard worker, a burgeoning unionizer, a mother. She then becomes a wife, and she's juggling all of these roles. And every single environment that she's in, you see these very subtle shifts in the way that she operates, right? Like and again, it's subtle, but it's like Sally's like shoulders being more upright when I noticed when she's walking through the factory after she gets that position where she has to kind of like be tracking what everyone's doing. And then her body language and the way that she sits when she's talking to Ruben, like and all those scenes when she's in his hotel room and she's having conversations, and there are moments where she feels like a little girl, you know. And so
Right.
I thought again that's those were choices that she clearly made as a performer that I thought were really brilliant. So I thought again this was another
For sure.
solid performance.
Yeah, and you definitely see some of that method coming into play here, I think, with a lot of that. I mean, yeah, I love Sally Field. There really is, like you said, that comfort level that I have when I see her in anything really, in film, TV. She just has such a unique presence and also a really unique voice, too. Like, I don't know anyone who sounds like Sally Field, which is great. There's a spunkiness there that I love, and just like an energy level that very much it feels like when you're experiencing like in your own life, but maybe you have to sort of paper it over with being nice and approachable and friendly and not making a fuss. And she does that too in certain parts of the film, but also it's like she has this like inner frustration that she's so good at externalizing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly thinking of like Mrs. Doubtfire when she's like the whole
Oh
time,
yeah.
like that kind of energy I adore from Sally Field.
Totally.
But then she also has like this radiant smile too that just like lights up a room. And I think she uses all of that to such great effect here and is really, for me, a very inspiring film. Even if, like you said, maybe the film itself isn't perfect, but the way she channels this character and her growth, I think is a great sort of symbol of what one person can do if they really fight for what they believe in. And, I think it's present even in the first few scenes, really, like how commanding she can be when she sets her mind to something. Like, obviously, telling the doctor that her mother is struggling to hear because of the noise in the factory. And she just has like this blunt attitude and a tough exterior that's very, very blue collar, very working class. And it's all worth mentioning, like, she is doing an accent here. And I do think it's pretty convincing,
Yeah,
so
the accent didn't bump me.
yeah, because sometimes when we have actresses playing Southern, it can be a little stereotypical sounding with it or like go too far into it. But she just, I don't know, she just something about her appearance and the way she carries herself just reads as like, I've never left this small town.
Yeah, her performance is it's natural. I think the best way to articulate it is her performance is lived in. It feels
Yeah.
lived in, and it isn't. and it's lived in without being showy, which is I think the thing I
Yes.
appreciated the most, because I again, as a character, Norma Rae is not big and bombastic. Like that's just not who this character is. She doesn't take up a lot of space. And I think that again, in lesser hands, I could see a performer coming in and filling in the space and making it really big, because they they don't want the performance to be too subtle. It's like, and here I think that there's two scenes for me that really stand out in terms of that lived in quality without being showy. And one of them is when she goes to confront the pastor at the church.
Hmm.
And he's very direct with her. And the things that she said, it's like you could have played those lines so many ways. And I'm curious if like the bigger version was left on the cutting room floor. Like was she directed to that, or did she just sort of come in with what we see on screen? But she keeps it
Right.
small, and you could tell that she's taking what he said to heart and taking it personally. And then the other scene is when she's going around to the men and she's handing out the flyers. And again, it's like it's so warm and familiar, but there was a quality about it that felt, in the way that it's shot, it's not fair to say verite, but there were moments where I wondered like how many of those people were actors and how many of them were just like local folks. Like were those
Yeah.
just kind of men that they were like, hey, we're just gonna put you in a scene, because there was something about the interaction between them that felt very natural to me, which is super indicative of like cinema of the 70s. So like I appreciated that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a scene of great, a movie of great subtle scenes, even if, like you said, there are moments where it becomes a little too blunt. I think I'm thinking of like the scene at the bar, even that isn't like a super showy scene that you would think of as something memorable from the film, but just like when she's talking about how her ex-husband died and how her daddy wouldn't let her see him, and the way she's sort of telling it's this way that's like she's just telling a regular story, and it's like she's almost like laughing to keep from crying. It's not that she's laughing necessarily, but like she's sort of keeping up this kind of upbeat, friendly personality even when she's dealing with a past trauma, which
Hmm.
relates to, I think, her finding her own journey of finding it within herself to stand up for herself and for her coworkers, that she can't just keep going along with things while still knowing that they're being mistreated. And obviously a lot of that comes from Ruben, who I also think she has really interesting chemistry with, and that's such a fascinating relationship. Like, what exactly is the nature of this relationship? Like, it seems like it may trend towards the romantic, in a lesser movie perhaps, but this is kept like very platonic and respectful. And even if she might want to do something with him, maybe because he kind of like brings something out of her that she didn't know was there, in a way, just like intellectually, I think he kind of like stimulates her, so to speak.
I have to say that, so to go back to what I mentioned at the top of talking about this film, that was the part of the film that didn't work for me.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so I appreciated Ron's performance as Ruben. So it's not a
Hmm.
question of acting. I think it has more to do with like what was on the page, the story itself. But there was like this weird will they, won't they energy
Yeah.
between them, that once she meets Beau Bridges and they connect, it felt like this, and maybe this is just me being too writerly in deconstructing the film, but because now you have this weird triangulation of like Norma and these two men in her life, and obviously we see there's that scene where Beau is upset because like he goes to drink the milk and it's spoiled, and he's like, clothes need to be washed, the kids are dirty, they haven't showered, you're
Yeah.
you're not doing your womanly wifely duties, motherly duties.
Hmm.
So he confronts her and she's upset, but it felt like in the script maybe there was a version where that triangle was played out, but then it was abandoned,
Yeah.
because I just was confused by, am I supposed to be invested in what's happening between Norma Rae and and Ruben or not? Because now she's married to this other guy who, for all intents and purposes, with the exception of that one scene where he's articulating in a very chauvinistic way that he misses his wife because she's been working hard to get the union together. I don't understand why I would still be invested in Norma and Ruben. It's like her
Mm.
relationship is with Sonny, who is a nice guy. So, you haven't given me a reason to not like him. So I'm on board for their relationship. So what am I supposed to feel about this other connection? There's specifically that scene when they're in the river together or the lake,
Yeah.
and they're kind of swimming, and there's like a sexual tension there that just made me really uncomfortable. I was like, I
Hmm.
don't understand what's happening here. Like, it just felt strange to me. And I'll be honest, at the end of the film, once Ruben leaves, like, I was happy for him to go. I just was like, the whole movie, I kept finding myself thinking, Norma, don't mess up your life. like you've got
Yeah.
your three, but you got your babies and you got your husband, and for all intents and purposes, like, you seem fine living in this world, right? Like, there's that really interesting
Hmm.
scene where Ruben's talking about New York, and it's like, there's the ballet, and I can go to the Met, and he's like engaging her intellectually, I think, but I think in some ways also, depending on how you read the moment, trying to entice her, like trying to tell her like what life she could have in New York. And at least my takeaway from the film is that she's perfectly content with the life that she's living. So when he leaves, I'm happy for him to go, but I also like didn't appreciate that it felt like he was trying to, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that he was trying to create a bomb in her life. So anyway, all that to say that that part of the movie didn't work for me, and I felt like she sold those scenes, but I wondered if for Sally, if she had some of the same confusions. Like, she clearly as an actor had to make a choice
Yeah,
in those
that's
scenes,
true.
but I wasn't sure,
Hmm.
like, was all that intentional, or was that just like not great writing and she just made a choice? I wasn't sure.
I mean, maybe it's just me just like seeing how the movie ends and they just part on sort of bittersweet terms, essentially, just feeling like I sort of understand just like how he was able to awaken something within her. And even if it does have that weird romantic tension at times, I guess not to be too like results oriented in terms of the ending, but I kind of appreciated seeing a different kind of relationship that could have gone in a romantic way, but both of them knowing better than to explore anything further, to cross any lines, I guess. To me, it felt like somewhat of a interesting sort of mature stance, but I could also
Mm.
see what you said in terms of like this could have just been a cheap sort of love triangle thing in a different draft. So I need to look into more of exactly what the intention was there. But anyway, either way, I thought that she played it well enough that I wasn't too distracted by it personally.
Yeah.
And I mean, just to talk more about the scene that people think about with Norma Rae, which is that scene of her holding up the Union sign. Watching it, like I've seen this film before, but watching it again now, I honestly started tearing up just
Mm.
watching that whole segment, just like seeing just like the solidarity and seeing people standing up for their rights and like turning off their machines one by one. And I think she just plays that scene so perfectly where she looks visibly scared at the beginning, but she has her certainty too. And she's like more and more affirmed as people are showing that solidarity. And I do think it is just inspiring without being cheesy or corny. Like, she's so in command of it that you can't take your eyes off of her. And it's like you understand why these people would want to follow her lead, really. And I feel like it's a scene that can sometimes be taken out of context, maybe, or like memed to death.
Hmm.
But I feel like everything that builds up to it, and in her performance especially, I think it's so much more powerful in context. Like the
Completely.
fact that it is so built up to that. I feel like if you look at it out of context, it sort of neutralizes the power, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you see the journey of what builds up to it, more impactful.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
One of the things also that makes that particular moment so, I think, incredible and makes it really powerful is her stature, because
Yeah.
she's such a slight person, and so that she's being so defiant in the face of all of these men who are significantly larger than her, and then she gets up on this table and commands, this small woman commands the attention of this entire group of people. It's, that also I think makes the scene really pack a wallop.
Mm-hmm. It's an incredible breakthrough dramatic performance from Sally. I mean, she already had Sybil, but in terms of film performances, you can see why after this she would have a very good career moving forward. So let's talk Oscars. Let's talk about this Best Actress race.
Mhm.
So Sally Field won everything leading up to the Oscars, and I mean everything. She won the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Drama. She had already won at the Cannes Film Festival, even. She won with the New York Film Critics, the Los Angeles Film Critics, the National Society of Film Critics, National Board of Review. Literally every award that she was up for leading up to the Oscars, she won. So in terms of like a race, I don't know if there really was one in terms of really predicting. Although Bette Midler, of course, did win the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy, so she was at least on the board for something.
And she won for
And
new
she was,
performer as well, right?
yes, New Star of the
Yeah.
Year or whatever they had back then. Yeah. And she was a nominee for some other critics' awards. As far as everyone else, Jill Clayburgh, Marsha Mason, Jane Fonda, they were all Golden Globe nominees, didn't win. Although Jane Fonda actually won at BAFTA, which is interesting, but none of these other Oscar nominees were actually nominated at BAFTA, so it's one of those interesting situations there where hard to really see if she could have won if Sally Field was there or if Bette Midler was there even. But let's talk about why we think Sally Field was our big winner from this group. What do you think?
Well, I think it's clear from this field that the two folks that I'm sure most people were sort of deciding between were Sally and Bette Midler.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you're isolating just the two of them, it feels like you have this subtle, relatable, emotional performance in Sally. And in Bette's performance, it's a more robust, physically challenging role. And I think in general, in the Best Actress category, the Academy tends to lean more towards the emotional.
Yeah.
So in that way, I think that makes sense to me. The other thing is that I would assert that cinema is all about indelible moments, and Sally gets an indelible moment when Norma writes Union on that
Mm-hmm.
cardboard and hops up on the table. So as we were just talking about a moment ago, it's been memed to death. Like every single Oscar, whenever they're doing their montage of scenes and memorable moments, it's always included in that clip package. It's
Yep.
she gave us that moment. And so I think more than any of the other performances, that's the thing that tends to really stand out.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of the fact that I think the other really important thing here is that Sally's someone who had been working in the industry for a really long time between Gidget and The Flying Nun. And I think similar to like when you'll talk about soon, when Jodie Foster wins for The Accused, I think that there are those folks who just have been in the industry for a really long time. We've known them since they were kids. I'm waiting for Saoirse Ronan to have her moment. But it's like, I think that there's an appreciation
Yes.
for these actors who started off as children and continue to work and build their craft. So I think those are probably
That's true.
the strongest reasons for why Sally won.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think she is such a likable, rootable character, the underdog, and is Sally Field just proving people wrong who dismissed her as the flying nun. Like we were also saying, like this is the only Best Picture nominee in the bunch, so clearly this film resonated across the board with Oscar voters. And for me, it's like the kind of thing where it's so on her shoulders what the film is doing that like the fact that she was able to sort of usher in a Best Picture nomination on top of Best Actress, I think that's a pretty huge deal because like the movie is her.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously that isn't like foolproof. Like we literally just talked about Jill Clayburgh kind of ushering in her own Best Picture nomination for An Unmarried Woman, and that didn't end up with a win for her. But I think with Sally, like if you were to just compare it to Bette Midler, because I don't really think that the other three were serious threats at the end of the day,
Yeah.
that it's sort of like a Ellen Burstyn versus Jenna Rollins in 1974 sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Like they're both really great performances, but one is just a little easier to go down, easier to swallow, I guess. And one is incredibly bracing and difficult to watch, but for me is also extremely cathartic and worthy on its own terms. But you could imagine like a widespread Academy, not everyone being on board with that and finding it a little too dark, a little too difficult to watch.
Completely.
So that's what I think it comes down to at the end of the day. Like we said, this really wasn't a race, so there's not a whole lot to talk about there. I did want to just read a few quotes from Sally Field, who was a little bit sassy when it came to talking about the Oscars at the time. She had some things to say that are quite different from what she would eventually say in her second speech, and her breathless saying that, you really like me,
Mm-hmm.
Where at first she said, the Oscars, I think it's exploitative, over-commercialized, frequently offensive, and shouldn't be televised. But then she eventually did add, sure, I'll be there. If I said I wasn't coming, they'd still go on with the show. So that's interesting. But then after the Oscars, after she wins, she said, I do feel like the Academy is slacking off in the class quotient. After all, I won. It's like the Groucho Marx line about, I wouldn't want to be in a club that would have me as a member. I mean, I wish she would have a little more self-worth there, because like she deserves to be a member of the club. But yeah, it's just interesting to see how certain actors talked about the Academy in a way that isn't really done a whole lot these days, I don't think.
No, I think it's interesting because obviously the Oscars meant a lot and was important then, but I think in our modern day era, it's like it means so much, and it's also been commodified, even pre
Yeah.
the museum. So I think the value and the worth of a nomination and what that means for a film. I think the visibility of being able to walk that red carpet or present, it's like all of that. It's just it means something different today than it did then. So it's not surprising
Yeah.
to me that we don't hear those kinds of critiques around the Academy anymore, outside of
Yeah.
the need for the Academy overall, the members to be more diverse.
Right. Yeah. Talking specifically about that aspect of it, that is pretty similar to some of the complaints that they had in the 70s. But yeah, I think it's time to get to our Twitter questions, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right. And we did get a few more because this is the last episode of the 70s, so we had a few general 70s questions. Let's start with Glenda Miss Jackson, if you nasty. If Sally Field could only have one Oscar, which one do you let her keep?
Well, Norma Rae is, I think, a better performance.
Yes.
So Norma.
Here's why this is tricky. I'll say, so I don't reveal like who I would have picked to win from this lineup until the last segment. I think Norma Rae is her better performance compared to Places in the Heart. So if she could only have one Oscar, just like in a vacuum, regardless of wins or losses and other competitors, it should be for Norma Rae. That is my diplomatic answer for that.
Yes, cosign.
James R. Byrne said, how much did Sally's collaboration with Burt Reynolds in enormously successful movies like Smokey and the Bandit help her nab Norma Rae? It proved her movie appeal, and Sybil proved her acting chops.
Oh, that it helped her snag Norma Rae. I would argue that Sybil
I think it was
probably
Sybil, right?
the
Yeah.
thing that helped her nag this film, but
Rob Montoya said, Sally Field's fellow nominees, Jane Fonda, Jill Clayburgh, and Marsha Mason, were all considered for the part of Norma Rae before Field. Would you have preferred any of those actresses over Field, or who would have been your second choice for the role?
I would not have preferred any of those women over Sally.
Yeah,
Um,
agreed.
yeah.
If I had to pick one, I don't know if Jane Fonda would have been fully believable as Norma Rae, because she needs to be, I don't know if she needs to be, but like part of the appeal of the character is that she is kind of small in moments. And I don't think Jane Fonda ever reads as small. So
Or can sell working class. I don't know that I
Or
fully
that.
would buy that
Yeah.
from her, but
Yeah, that would not probably go well. Weirdly, I sort of think Marsha Mason would be the most convincing of those three as like someone from North Carolina compared to Jill Clayburgh, who also reads like very New York to me.
very, yes.
But either way, history proved correct that Sally Field deservedly got the part. Jamie said, Field won here and at Cannes. How do you rank her against the other actresses to pull off both? Simone Signoret in Room at the Top, Sophia Loren in Two Women, and Holly Hunter in The Piano. I would probably rank her like third among that group, behind Sophia Loren and Holly Hunter, personally.
That would be my ranking as well.
Yeah, but I adore those three a lot. And Simone Signoret, slightly less, but still like her. Matt Stillman said, if Norma Rae were to be remade today, once the strikes are over / fairly resolved, as a writer or actor strike film, which leading actress of the 2020s plays Norma?
That's an interesting question.
I mean, I don't know if like an actor or writer specific thing would be like this, because this is just like about a small town and like one person helping to galvanize something. I don't know if like the writer actor strike is quite like that, but I don't know. Who would you cast if we were to just remake Norma Rae? And I don't know if it has to be strike, like writer strike specific.
I think if it's a adaptation or like a direct remake, like we're keeping the character in the same environment, same narrative, I would say, who I think would be really interesting in the role? Andrea Riseborough.
Oh boy. Yeah, that would be cool.
Like she has
she is a chameleon.
She's a chameleon.
So I could see it. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what a film like Norma Rae, at least if we were going to make it today, needs. Like, I think populating movies with too many big stars, it's like it takes too long for you to sort of get to the place where you're not looking at that performer anymore.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. That's a really good pick. I went with, I don't know if you like this particular actress, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Jodie Comer.
Oh, yeah, no, I like her a lot.
Yeah, I think she could commit to just like the smallness of it, but also then like the growth of it. And for some reason, I could just like see in my mind Jodie Comer holding up the Union sign specifically. I don't know. It just like, I could see that. But
yeah, I like that you picked a stage and television actress. Love that.
Exactly. Well,
and she's on her way to an EGOT because she's got like a Tony and an Emmy at this point. So
she's halfway. Yep.
Almost there.
That could be her ticket. Yeah.
Norma Rae and a book on tape.
There we go. Yeah. Joey Gentili said, Jill Clayburgh's better performance in Luna was nominated for the Globe drama that year. Why do you think she got in for her lesser performance in Starting Over? I have not seen Luna.
I think,
but
isn't Luna about like incest?
It is about incest. So
there's your answer.
There's your answer. Yeah, I was even looking back at the Oscars of that year, and they made jokes about Luna and the incest part of it and like the opening monologue. So moving on. Fritz said, the last nomination for Jill. What are nominated roles of the 80s that you could see her in? So recast Jill Clayburgh and someone who got nominated in the 80s.
Ooh, that's good.
So if you have the Best Actress tab pulled up, that would be helpful. I came up with like if like in 1989 specifically, if they did Terms of Endearment, I think she could play the Shirley MacLaine role.
Oh. You know who I think would be really, although I have to say, I love this performer and I love this performer in that role. But Jill Clayburgh in Ordinary People.
That is a near and dear film to my heart, and I could absolutely see her slaying that.
Although I have to say, Mary Tyler Moore, perfection in that film. Yes. Perfection.
Yes.
But I could see Jill Clayburgh in that role and also slaying.
What about Aliens as Ellen Ripley?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know about that one. Although, can I say, are you going to ask about like performers who we would have liked to have seen nominated?
I think that is part of a question that comes later, so we can.
Okay, so then I will wait.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's see. James Byrne said, do you think Candice Bergen's scene-stealing comedic turn in Starting Over overshadowed Jill and her chances to win? I don't think it impacted too
No.
much, it was always going to be Sally regardless.
Yeah.
So Joey Gentili said, the China Syndrome infamously has a video game adaptation. Which other actress nominee and film here deserved a video game? I
I
mean, Norma Rae.
definitely want the Norma Rae video game. Hello.
That would be fun. Yeah, like each coworker that you can convince to join the union, like you increases your health or your stamina or something. I don't know.
I would.
Running across the mill from your bosses. Like there's a lot there.
It's pretty great.
Yeah. Can't really see anything else here making for a compelling video game. The Rose. Oh boy. Yeah.
Unless it's like Rock Band, where it's just
That's true.
a microphone and you're singing songs.
Yes, right. Brad Morton said, Chapter 2 is so boring and uninspired. How did this film make $30 million in 1979?
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah. I think there was just a craving for romantic comedies at this time when like everything else was so dark and gritty, even though this isn't really comedy, like we said.
Also, like people were familiar with Neil Simon and his work, and so I would imagine that that also probably helped to bring people in.
For sure. Gordon said, how refreshing was it to only have to watch 4 movies this week, even if you had to watch the same movie twice for Clayburgh and Mason?
The shade of it all.
Yeah, although it's actually the opposite of refreshing because it just felt so repetitive to watch one after another. But
completely.
Yeah. Let's see. Bobby Doyle said, the Mason-Simon 3-movie run might be the strongest pairing to ever show up consistently at the Oscars. What are other actress creative duos you wish scored like this? Well, I have a very easy one for me. It's Liv Ullmann and Ingmar Bergman.
You love your Liv.
I do.
Who's another one that a combo I really appreciate is Penelope Cruz and Pedro Almodovar.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Who seem
Good
to
call.
always, their work together, just lovely.
Christoph said, according to Inside Oscar, Chapter 2 got an early release to prevent an Oscar nomination for Hanna Schygulla in The Marriage of Maria Braun. How incredibly nasty is that?
I didn't know about that.
Yes, I did read that as well. Basically, they felt like this unknown German actress getting an Oscar nomination, despite, like, she had a lot of acclaim, so there was talk of her getting a nomination. They thought that would be like a waste or something on, like a waste of a slot for whatever reason. So they made a play with Chapter 2 and essentially, like, knocked her out.
Well,
I haven't seen the movie, but yes. But I believe you, Christoph, that Hannah was probably more worthy than Marsha Mason. Greg Adams said, Bette Midler gives one of the greatest performances of all time in The Rose. Is this performance/movie forgotten about today, especially among music films?
Maybe. I mean,
I don't know if it's forgotten, but not talked about as much as it should be, maybe?
Definitely not talked about as much as it should be. I think part of it is that her performance is stronger than the film.
Yeah.
And that might be the reason. Also, I think and this is like you could probably do a whole other 2-hour podcast about this, but I do think there's like a little stinkiness around movie, and not that this is a musical, but music and in film, like I just don't think that like cinephiles look at whether it's a biopic like The Rose or just a straight musical like Sound of Music. Like I just think there's like a bias around it in the way that there's like genre bias. So I'm not super surprised that people are not talking about or thinking about The Rose in conversation with other like cinema of the 70s.
That's an excellent point. I haven't thought about that a lot, but that does seem to follow that, especially in certain film circles, that music-based stuff, and especially musicals, are just not taken seriously.
Yeah.
Seems very straight male-oriented way of thinking at times. But yeah, I do think it should be sort of thought of as like a early foundational music film biopic type of film, even though it isn't necessarily a biopic, but like kind of is. Miles McHale said, Bette Midler has gone on record that she believes she deserved. Which other Oscar-losing diva do you think should put out a press release saying, I deserved?
Glenn Close.
Oh my god, you don't have to tell me. Yes.
I mean, I could make a really strong case for her in Fatal Attraction, which is one of those performances for me that's pretty remarkable and indelible, but for sure for Dangerous Liaisons.
Yes. Yes, agreed. I was thinking of just like someone like Isabelle Huppert would be funny if she was just like, you know what, I deserved it for Elle, but like Emma Stone can have her Oscar, like it's fine. Like I truly gave the best performance, but like, you know, the Oscars, what do they really mean, really? I could see her giving some kind of statement like that.
Love
Um,
it.
anyway, GCDNC said, in The Rose, Bette Midler's character meets her drag impersonator. Which of the other four nominees do you think would inspire the best drag impersonation?
I think Norma Rae. Just think there would be like
Is this like the specific character or like the actress? I don't know.
I thought it was the character that they played, and I'm just maybe because I've been watching Drag Race All Stars, like I'm thinking of somebody like Jimbo playing Norma Rae, which I think would be hysterical.
Yeah, I can't really think of, I don't think any of the others really would inspire anything substantial other than just like Jane Fonda as an actress, maybe, but I can't see it for Jill or Marsha. Existential Rock said, in honor of Norma Rae and, well, everything else that's happening right now, rank these nominees from most to least likely to cross a picket line.
Ooh, ooh, let's.
Wow.
I'm gonna plead the fifth.
Play the fifth. I mean, I'll just say I think all of these ladies would respect the rules and just leave it at that. Although Jane Fonda would be least likely. So
Oh,
I'll say that.
she's been on the picket line. There's
Exactly.
Twitter
Right.
footage.
Yes, exactly. And I'm sure Jill Clayburgh would be too if she were here. All right. Amy Thomason said, do you think Shirley MacLaine was in consideration for being there? What are your thoughts on her performance?
It has been a minute since I've seen Being There, so I feel like
Me too.
I would need a rewatch to really dig in.
I do feel like she might have been a little more supporting than lead from my memory, but she did get lead nominations at Golden Globe and BAFTA, so I'm sure she was in the conversation. Andrew Carden said, I suspect the race for those fourth and fifth slots were among 5 turns in comedies. Clayburgh, Mason, Julie Andrews in 10, Diane Keaton in Manhattan, and Shirley MacLaine in Being There.
Hmm.
Why do you think Clayburgh and Mason edged out the others? And who do you think was 6th?
Oh, that's tough. I think sixth probably perhaps between Shirley and Diane because they were in 2 films that got nominations. I'm not sure why those 2 made it in. I mean, Marsha feels like I was gonna say a legacy, because she had just been nominated 2 years,
Afterglow
you know.
of The Goodbye Girl. Yeah,
Although, I mean, I suppose you could have made that same argument then for Diane because she had just won for Annie Hall. So,
that's true.
like, I don't know.
It's hard to say. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Jill and Marsha just had better traditional showcases in their films. I'm not sure.
I think to me, Jill, for sure, it's the strength of an unmarried woman. I think it's,
yeah,
it feels very similar to like Meryl getting nominated every year for everything she does. It's like
yeah,
they're solid. We like them. You've made it in before, so check.
right.
Marsha, I'm a little more fuzzy on, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't know if we have any other snub questions, so I don't know if you wanted to talk about one that you thought should be here.
Okay.
At this point.
So, for sure, I think in this field, the 2 that I think are not as strong as the others are, Jill and Starting Over, Marsha in Chapter 2.
Yeah.
I don't begrudge Jill's nomination. I think Marsha, for sure, I would rescind. And the performance for me that I'm like, I really wish it made it in. Although this actor was nominated for this role years later, is Sigourney Weaver in Alien. I think first of all,
nice.
I love Alien. Like it's one of my favorite films. I love, and I think Sigourney Weaver should have an Oscar. She's another one who I fucking love Working Girl, and breaks my heart that she doesn't have an Oscar. But anyway,
yeah.
I just think that her work in Alien to me is akin to the work that they honored here with Sally Field and Norma Rae, which is like it's very subtle. It's like it's not a super verbose role. Like she doesn't have a ton of lines. A lot of the movie with her lives here, like in a medium shot of her face. Super subtle, but it's her reacting. I love that, in 1979 a movie was made in space where the woman is the survivor. Like I fucking love that.
I know.
It's a good movie. It holds up. I watch it once a year, and she's great in it. And again, I'm so happy she got the nomination for Aliens. But I wish
Such a
that she
cool
had been here
nomination.
for
Yeah.
Alien because I think she was
Yeah.
solid, and her work is, I think, certainly stronger than Marsha's in Chapter 2. So
Yeah, and how fun would it have been to talk about that performance here? I definitely agree with that. I love Alien. That's my favorite of those films to begin with, and she is iconic. Let's see. Owen Daly said, "Would you like history lessons on the actresses like we got with the 1979 nominee presentations?" Yeah, so I don't know if you've seen the clip of Sally Field winning for this, but in the intro to each of the, calling out the name of each nominee, they give like a full biography of like the roles leading up to that nomination. So I thought it's pretty cool. They did something obviously similar in like 2008 or 2009 too, with those long tributes to those categories, like the acting categories. I don't know if you remember that,
yeah,
but
when Kate Winslet
that
won.
was cool.
I,
Yes,
I I
exactly.
waffle back and forth because I have to say one of the things I love the most about watching the Oscars is the clips. Although it's annoying
Yes,
that then when the Academy posts it on YouTube, it's clipless,
they're
which
removed.
is
I
kind
know.
of irritating.
Drives me crazy. Yeah.
Um, so
It's a rights thing, but still,
yeah,
it's annoying.
as all hell. So I love the clips. Although I will say, one of my favorite presentations was that 81st Oscars, where that's the year that Kate Winslet won for The Reader, and Sean Penn won for Milk. Like I loved the having like these legacy winners coming out, like former winners coming and sort of passing the mantle and talking about each nominee. Loved it. Very long. It took time,
Very long. Yeah.
but I loved it. The other presentation, though, that I will say that I also thoroughly enjoyed is the year, forgetting the year though. It's the year that the first year that it's the year that Christoph Waltz won his first Oscar.
2009. So that was the year after Kate Winslet. That was Sandra Bullock winning.
Was it that year?
Yeah. Christoph's first win. Yeah.
Okay, maybe it was that year. Oh, you know what it is? It's that they only did it for the supporting actors. They didn't do it for lead. But in that year, if you go back, the clip package for that was kind of similar to like the year that Marriage Story was nominated, where they kind of did like a montage
Oh, right.
of
Yeah, I
like all
remember
the
that.
different performances. And so that I
Yeah.
also really
That was
loved.
cool.
There's something like very epic when they do these montages. So I enjoy
Yeah.
that. Like if they're not going to do clips, give me that.
Yes. Agreed. And I mean, I feel like it would be cool to have like the most recent Best Actress presentation, like giving little biographies on Kate Blanchett and Michelle Yeoh and Andrea Riseborough. Like that could have been really interesting. So yeah, let's see. Fritz said, rank the winners of the decade. Okay, so I wrote out my full list. My number one is Jane Fonda and Clute. Period. 2, I have Liza Minnelli and Cabaret. Very close. 3, I have Faye Dunaway and Network. All top tier. 4, I have Sally Field and Norma Rae. 5, I have Ellen Burstyn and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. 6, I have Diane Keaton and Annie Hall. 7, I have Glenda Jackson and Women in Love. 8, I have Louise Fletcher in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. 9, I have Jane Fonda in Coming Home. And 10, I have Glenda Jackson in A Touch of Class.
That's pretty solid.
Thank you. I know some people like Louise Fletcher a little more than I do in Cuckoo's Nest, but that's okay.
This is really hard. I for sure would have Faye Dunaway as my number one.
Yes.
So just love her, as I talked about earlier.
You don't have to do a full ranking if you don't want to. It's up to you.
Okay, then we'll leave it there. That she's my number one.
Okay.
And
I'm curious what your last place is.
My last, I think my last would probably be Glenda Jackson in A Touch of Class.
Okay. Let's see. Jeremy Kaplan and Celluloid Siren both want me to list my 5 favorite nominated performances in this category of the 70s. So again, I wrote out my top 5. I have Ingrid Bergman in Autumn Sonata. I have Jill Clayburgh in An Unmarried Woman, both from 78. Jane Fonda in Clute. Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence. And one of the nominees this year, who I will not say because it will spoil her as my winner at the end of this episode.
Ooh, suspense.
Yes. But of those, I think I would rank Jenna Rollins as my number 1. Just one of those unforgettable performances for me.
A brilliant performance that is, shocking that it doesn't have an Oscar.
Correct. Yes.
That's an Oscar-winning performance.
Yep. Existential Rock said, reflecting on the 70s as a whole, which nominated performance was most likely to be filmed on location inside a woman's soul? So that's a wonderful deep cut for the great Susan Hayward performances that had the most ridiculous taglines for their films. And the answer for that is also, I think, Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence.
Period.
Yeah, they filmed inside of Jenna Rollins' soul.
Yeah.
Matt Duffy said, just over 5 decades of Best Actress down, who has given the greatest performance for you from each decade?
Oh.
All right. So I have Barbara Stanwyck and Stella Dallas for the 30s. For the 40s, I have Celia Johnson in Brief Encounter. For the 50s, I have Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. For the 60s, I have Elizabeth Taylor in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And for the 70s, Jenna Rollins, once again, in Woman Under the Influence. So,
a solid list. Solid.
Thank you. Joey Gentili said, recast these 70s Oscar talents in the roles above. Karen Black, Sarah Miles, Jeannie Berlin, Melinda Dillon, Brenda Vaccaro. So I have Karen Black in the Rose for sure. I think that would be really heartbreaking. I have Jeannie Berlin absolutely in Starting Over. I can't see her in anything else.
Okay.
I have Melinda Dillon in Norma Rae.
That I like a lot.
Yeah. Brenda Vaccaro I put in Chapter 2.
I'm super familiar with her work.
And then I'm left with Sarah Miles in The China Syndrome. And there we are.
Okay.
Not great casting overall, but that's what I had to work with. Lila said, since Sally and Jane are both here, in which of the other nominated roles would you cast Lily Tomlin and Rita Moreno in order to have a full 80 for Brady lineup?
Oh, wow. Perhaps... God, that's so tough because I don't know that either one of them I would put in the Rose.
Rita Moreno can sing, right? I think it would be very different, but that would be really cool to see her do something like the Rose. That would be wild.
That's true. And then it's like, pick your poison with Starting Over in Chapter 2. I'm going to go with Starting Over.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I will save both of them from doing Chapter 2.
Yeah.
All right, a few more questions here. Cinema Sex Kitten said, 1979 was the peak and kind of end of the disco era. Rank these characters by the likelihood of being at Studio 54.
That's hysterical.
Yes.
For sure, Mary Rose is number 1.
100%. She is the queen. Yes.
I'm going to say Norma is probably number 2.
I
think secretly she likes
think
to
Ruben's
party.
going to take her to Studio 54?
I think that she went to Studio 54 before she ever met Ruben.
I love that for her.
That's why she was always looking at Ruben with that face when he talked about New York. She's like, I've been there
That's
already.
true. Oh, girl, I know.
Yeah, exactly. But he was mansplaining New York to her.
Exactly.
Like, okay. Then probably Jill as Marilyn. I would say Marsha is 4th, and then Jane is Kimberly's last.
That sounds right. I don't know what Kimberly would be doing there, other than reporting live from the scene at Studio 54.
That part.
Yeah. Okay, another one from Cinema Sex Kitten. This was the year that the original run of Wonder Woman ended. Rank these stars, so the actresses, not the characters, by their ability to play the role if Linda Carter had not been available. So who would make for the best Wonder Woman of these actresses?
I would be very curious to see Jane Fonda as Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I think she would be my number one. She would never do it, but like at this point in her career, but would love to see it.
All in.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then probably Sally Field, maybe. I mean, she has the TV experience, so I could see Sally doing that too, maybe. I don't know if I see the rest of these fitting with Wonder Woman.
Not really.
I wonder what Bette Midler's take on Wonder Woman would be.
Can she sing?
Right. Right. That's true. Okay. Nick said some, including BAFTA, believe that Meryl Streep is in fact the lead of Kramer versus Kramer. Do you think she was rightfully put in the supporting category, or do you think she should have been bumped to lead?
She absolutely should have been in supporting.
Yeah, I agree. She's supporting. I mean, I don't think it's really a question. If she is somehow put in lead, she knocks out one of Jill Clayburgh and Marsha Mason, and I do fear that it would be Jill Clayburgh. Because, like, the whole Marsha Mason thing was, like, an institution at this point. Like, she was always being considered, so...
It's definitely one of the two of them.
Yeah.
And I also think, sadly, Meryl does not win.
I know. That's true. No one's beating Sally. And finally, I don't know what else better to end on this 70s with than this question, which is from Patrick Ross, who said, Miss Piggy had her film debut this year. Which of these films do you think she'd excel in?
I love it. I for sure want to see Miss Piggy in The Rose.
I think that was the role she was born to play. She's a star and she burned out bright and fast, She would love to see it. I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear that vocal interpretation of those songs. Would love to hear her sing When a Man Loves a Woman. So, yeah. On that note, it's time for our final segment where we will give our verdict on who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Steven, I don't think it's a huge mystery who we both think it probably is, but go for it.
I believe the runner-up was probably Bette Midler in The Rose. She is just a formidable talent who gave a really beautiful, really nuanced performance.
Yeah, completely agree. And I don't think that any of the other three really came close to the two of them. Although Sally Field may have just gotten a vast majority of the votes anyway, that maybe it wasn't even a close race. But yeah, I think she's so fully committed that it's so much more of a showy performance than the other three that it just has to be. It has to be Bette. And I understand her when she says that she maybe deserved to win, because it's like she poured her whole heart and soul into that performance. So, yes. Final question for you. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
Okay. So it's not a hard question because I know what my answer is, but I will say let me just say it. I would have voted for Bette Midler in The Rose.
Wow.
It's interesting because, obviously we now know what the last 40 years of these women's career is. And I think it's probably easier for me to give the answer Bette Midler because I know that Sally has another Oscar coming. As we talked about earlier, I think if Sally's going to have an Oscar on her mantle, it absolutely should be for Norma Rae. With all of that said, in terms of what the performance sort of did for me as a viewer, what I'm left with emotionally, how I'm sort of wrestling with the narrative and thinking about these characters days after the credits have rolled, The Rose and Bette Midler's performance left a more indelible impression. So if I was ticking off a box at the Oscars in 79 or 80, I would have voted for Bette.
Well, I agree. I also would have voted for Bette Midler in The Rose here. The same general reason as you said. And also, in the same spirit of me picking Jenna Rollins over Ellen Burstyn, who I also really love and respect in that role, I just personally responded a lot more to what Bette Midler was doing in terms of fully laying it all out there on the table, as if she was never going to give another performance. And I am just so moved by her performance in that third act that I haven't forgotten it since I first saw it all those years ago. And watching it again, it's still as devastating as it was when I first watched it. So yeah, and I agree with you that like Sally Field having an incredible career and having another Oscar coming makes it all the more easier for me to say absolutely would have thrown my weight over to Bette Midler.
For sure. And you know, I'm so curious to know how Bette's career may have, you know, shifted, if at all, had this win happened.
Yeah, because it does sometimes have an effect. So yeah, would have been interesting. Yeah. But either way, they're both icons and they've had incredible careers, Oscar or not.
Truly.
So on that note, Steven, thank you so much. This was such a blast. I still can't believe you agreed to do this, and you were great. So would love to have you back.
I would love to be back. Thank you for inviting me. This was lovely. And I'm such a fan, like I said, and of one of your many listeners. And so I can't wait to hear all about your thoughts on the ladies from the 80s.
Yes, the ladies from the 80s and the rise of Reagan, unfortunately. Oof. Anyway, a lot to unpack in the future. But yes, tell people where they could find more of your great work on the internet and otherwise, since it's not just restrained to the internet.
I on social am Steven Canals, Steven with a V.
That's right.
And Canals like ear, Panama, birth, but with an S at the end. And my show Pose that I created a few years back that aired on FX is available on Hulu, all 3 seasons. So you can stream it now.
Highly recommend. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson and at Oscar Runner-Up. Instagram at And the Runner-Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup where you can find a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And that's it for the season. Really sad to be done with this incredible era of film and actresses, but there's plenty of good stuff to come with the 80s. And I will announce here that the premiere of the 1980s season will be on September 27th, which seems like a little while from now, but it'll go by fast, and I have plenty of bonus episodes planned in between, so don't you worry, I'm not going anywhere. But anyway, if you want to get a head start on the 80s, the first lineup we'll be talking about, of course, is 1980, where the nominees were Ellen Burstyn in Resurrection, Goldie Hawn in Private Benjamin, Mary Tyler Moore in Ordinary People, Jenna Rollins in Gloria, and Sissy Spacek in Coal Miner's Daughter, with the winner being Sissy Spacek. So with that, thanks again, Steven.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I will bid you all adieu.